Okay, we are live. So hello, beautiful Satorians. Maybe more of you will show up. Aurea Satineta. So we have a special guest today. His name is Sevan Bomar. And before I introduce him, I just wanted to call upon our guides and angels of the highest order to bless us with peace, health, wealth, abundance. You can add in anything you'd like. And as Sevan would say, wholeness, balance, and vibration. And so it is. So Sevan is a master teacher, in my opinion, of esoteric knowledge, occult knowledge. You can find his YouTube channel. It's called Understanding. And on there are tons of amazing videos on our true history, the meaning of symbols, and how they're being used to program the populace, along with information on how to free yourself from this dysfunctional system that we live in. So you can head to Sevan's website, astralquest.com, and enroll in the Interversity, where there are online classes to help you master your limitless potential. So I highly recommend that as well. So thank you so much for joining me today, Sevan. How are you?
Like I said, I'm doing super amazing. I've actually just went through a massive constellation switch. So I just call it that anytime I'm doing some moving. So I've moved and now I'm in this new house. And I'm really, just digging it. I think it's this is a year for many people. This 2017 that we're coming into is massive manifestation or massive lesson time, kind of depending on where you're at with the whole thing. So I'm in the manifestation side of things. So I'm looking to come into this, really powerful and show people how to really get the action that they're looking for on all levels.
Thank you. And your cat made an appearance.
I lock him up.
So my first question for you would be, could you tell me a little bit more about your spiritual journey? Did something act as a catalyst for your awakening?
Yeah, for sure. I guess, to crunch, because, I think we probably could run for about 2 hours. I can run all night, but, everyone does have their time. So I think an hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe, if that's where you want to go. And since we have that much time, it means that I'm going to need to really be eloquent to compress quite a bit of knowledge into this session that we're going to have. And then also, work, the people that are online, we can all work together in harmonizing and balancing the energy. So that way we get a maximum exposure. We get it just sinks in, because what happens is I think that in a lot of radio shows and presentations, people, they have their general thing that they present. Like they got their book and, they got, their journey, their contact or whatever. And, what that doesn't do a lot of times is it doesn't get actually to where the audience is and, what they need to keep progressing. And I'm big on actually finding new ways to actually do that, to bring something that is totally different to this paradigm. And I'm not afraid to do that. So in that vein, my background is basically I was raised in deep levels of spirituality from just the seeking of the soul. My mother was doing it, and she was taking me along on the journey. And in that, because I was very receptive as just in watching things and taking notes, I was able to absorb quite a bit of spiritual, metaphysical, and paranormal data, right? And that's kind of what it was for me for a while, as I was just categorizing things and, and seeing how it all worked. Because I personally didn't have any spiritual experiences when I was younger, like I was seeing other people have. And this is going through, Pentecostal, Baptist, Presbyterian, these different kind of churches. There could be some pretty intense stuff going on. But what happened is a lot of seeds were planted. And also I didn't just grow up in more or less a dogmatic structure. I was really encouraged to continue to seek more. So my mother removed us from a lot of the games and the holidays and all these things. And she replaced all that with spiritual books and things that would teach you how to have a trade or a craft, like sewing and those kind of things. So with all that, obviously, when I hit in the teens, I kind of ran away from all that because it was super intense for me. It was boring, as any child that age would think it would be. And it was like a slingshot effect. So once I got out in the world, the most interesting thing is that I always had this spiritual aspect of how I was looking at things, more or less a scales within myself of how I was weighing whether I was actually progressing into, a grander spiritual horizon, or was I like descending into the infernal hell. So what happened is that at a certain point in my 20s, I started having scenarios occur in my life that were really demanding me to get this answer to what happens when we die. And that not only started when I was a child, that question kept kind of annoying me and bothering me throughout life. But then at a certain point, it kind of hit its crescendo in my 20s to where I wanted to know more about all the things that basically, does God exist? But not from the traditional, oh, let me go see what the pastor has to say, or let me go see what, other people's near-death experiences have to say about it. It was more of like, I need to know this now because I got a situation that only God, according to his resume, can handle. And so what happened is that I went deep into spirituality. I'm already very adept at just getting knowledge and information and troubleshooting. So I started looking into, since I had all this foreknowledge, like the Psittopikapha, the Apocrypha, the books of Enoch, and all this stuff. And I really had taken a lot of fantasy to Solomon. To Solomon, just because that kind of made up the archetypical idea of what I expected the spiritual world to be. So in the pursuit of just kind of understanding more about what the prophets were doing in the Bible, I was able to come across a lot of deep levels of information about mantras, just different things, names, words, lots of stuff, right? So as I kept researching, it started to really take on another level in my life because I had already had this spiritual background. And then all of a sudden I was getting these pieces that were kind of fitting the puzzle. And in one event, and this is because there's got to be some kind of crescendo or climax to all this. In one event, I had discovered this name that they call the name of God. And I kind of pursued it for a few years because it was quite elusive. I had heard about it in different books, and then since it came out a few times, I said, what is this hidden name? So long story short, I found this name. And seeing how people were utilizing mantras like hallelujah. People don't understand that even hallelujah is a mantra. And then over in the Eastern traditions, they're very familiar with mantras. But in this, seeing how that system connected, I decided to use that name like a mantra, just to see what it was going to do. Actually, I can't say I was playing around because I was always very serious about the whole thing. But because I had no major spiritual experiences, I didn't think nothing was going to happen. And obviously something did. And for a moment, I was way above my head. I actually experienced what most people probably experience when they go crazy. And because I had an extremely logical side of my consciousness, I was able to kind of like get myself grounded into what was a whole new vista that opened up for me in life. I spent 2 weeks with my chakras completely open, and I actually didn't know what chakras were then. I had a lot of dogmatic knowledge, like I could take it into different books and I understood the Abrahamic tradition to the T, but I had no metaphysical knowledge. So I didn't know anything about, again, chakras or high vibration and ascension and any of that kind of stuff. So I actually went through an ascension process that was really aggressive. And in that process, I had my oversoul, which at that point I thought was God. I had my oversoul giving me advice or play-by-play of what I was experiencing in the reality. And because I still before that had a lot of lucid dreams and a lot of connections just on that level alone, I was able to kind of like keep my logical mind in the stance that, hey, let's just listen to what this voice that we can't stop is saying without like being so afraid because we can't control it. And so I went through that process, and in listening, I learned many things, enough to within one day to completely stupefy my aspect of what I thought the world really was. I was also able to authenticate that the voice that I was hearing was not only true, but new things that I didn't know, that even when I tried to prove them, I would find out they were true. So that's kind of how it started. So I went into this 2 weeks of what would be like an ascent. And I learned about, a lot of things like when it comes to, let's say, reading people's minds, that was something that you could do, but you didn't want to do. It was a real experience to the sense of I had these abilities, but I was also very, it had shattered my life because before then I was actually doing really well. I had a few businesses, I've always been a very likable person. And so things were, as what most people will call in life, successful for me. And when the whole foundation came out of the whole thing, it left me really in this altered reality for a while to where I was just trying to exclaim to all the people that I met codes within the language, a bigger, grander scheme of reality, and, just all of what happens to many of us when we go through that awakening process. But again, for me, because I had a very strong logical side, I started to really see that there was more to it, and I needed to even sit down before I kept interacting with people and figure out what exactly I was dealing with and what was the full magnitude of it, if it could be measured. So in that process, after the 2 weeks, I decided to leave the United States, which actually was quite difficult. I think for most people, they don't realize how difficult it is to get out of the US, and that there's a lot of vortex-like stuff going on in the cities or towns that they're in. And when you only decide finally that you're going to leave, then you'll start seeing how much just tries to keep you there. So through a process of basically building up, and to me, that's a part of the ascension, just building up my own energetic field, I was able to pull out of, then it was Atlanta, and actually make a trip to Costa Rica, where I wrote a book called The Code to the Matrix. And I actually wrote the book kind of as my last will and testament with Earth. I had actually figured out so much information in that first process. I took what people would say is a download, but I have to always kind of put some emphasis on, but a real one, meaning that I was actually containing so much knowledge about real mechanics to how the matrix works that I even went through different phases like paranoia and Godhead and all these different phases of because just of what the information and the power that was coming with the information was doing to me. So I really kind of made amends with that. I needed to go on. I needed to move on from Earth because after what I had seen in that 2 weeks and what I had been capable of doing during that time, and then also what continued when I came in Costa Rica, I was just under the assumption that I was under this process of being caught up and leaving the planet. And because I had so much knowledge about this kind of thing taking place in the past, I didn't think that it by any means could not happen. So you were dealing with a person then I had full faith. Like my faith was unmovable. I could do different things with even my thoughts because I had seen it. And that's why I say, seeing is believing for many people. So when you see something weird go on and you see it with your own two eyes, you're sober, it gives you this different kind of faith where you're no longer worried if people don't believe what you're saying and any of that. And you keep moving, right? So this is what happened. And ultimately, again, I wrote the book and I was like, okay, so this thing is like a crystal skull. It keeps telling me the codes, telling me the words, showing me how it all matches up, showing me who's involved. So what I need to do is I need to kind of get this into a book. And then once I have that, then I can go on to whatever my existence is going to be. So I've done my duty to Earth. So I wrote this book in about 30 days, highly illustrated, super entertaining, and 231 pages of just tearing apart the matrix and removing all of what has set itself up inside of us to, get us to tap into and give our energy to, and just kind of cleans the slate like once and for all. I call it reasons. It's kind of set up in like reason 1, reason 2, and that goes all the way up to, I guess, like reason, I don't know, like 80 or reason 90. But all these were like reasons on why we should basically look at the matrix one more time, look at the world one more time, and make sure that we haven't somehow imagined things are different than the way they really are. And so when I put the book out, that was like, okay, I'm done. And I was asked personally, had I done my best by that same voice? And because, I've seen my best in life, like I've aced tests that I haven't studied for that were extremely complicated in one night, just doing it at the last minute. So I've seen how hard I can really push. And I could actually say that I didn't do that with the book. So needless to say, I opened up a website. The book went viral. Like within 2 days, I got 500,000 views. It was on Scribed. And people were not only connecting with what was going on and, bearing witness, if you made that, those kind of things had happened to them. And also a lot of dots that they weren't able to connect were connected. And then people were asking me, so where are you at now? Like, what do we do now? And so I started this website. It was called The Resistance because it just felt right, and resistance in the sense of immunity. A lot of people were like, resistance, that just means that, when you're doing that, you got people that judge you. But I felt like it was like immunity. We all have this immune system. And we need to, get our immune system together, especially on a spiritual level, to make sure that we're not, getting vampired in a nutshell. So what ended up happening is that we started the site. The site started growing. I think I put in 1,500 blogs, like long stuff too. So I wrote like 4 or 5 more books within the blogs, and it just took off. And now here we are 7 years later We're 16, 17,000 members strong. We have, some of the massive, we have some of the most massive repositories of spiritual knowledge on the internet, where the people know that those sources belong to us, because most of the time it's just anonymous, because you're sharing so much information in books. And so the final frontier for us actually is open source spirituality. I decided to pioneer something that, once I kind of got my senses back together and realized that I wasn't going to be caught up to another planetary sphere, and however that was going to look to everyone else, I didn't care whether if it came across that I had died or everyone just freeze framed. I didn't care. So once I finally leveled into that, I actually wasn't looking to go anywhere. I was actually looking to stay here and to really get into this, right? Once I made that decision, then, it was just on from there. I kind of got all my senses back. And I was able to see what were all like the pitfalls, even with, I guess you could call it the New Age movement and many of these different movements, to where they got stagnant with their message and what they were presenting. And this is why, we're so diverse. We have people all around the world, because we cover every single topic. We don't leave any stone unturned. We've done a lot of heavy work on the spiritual and metaphysical realm now, because personally, I just kept going on journeys. I figured out formulas of how to achieve what I had achieved in the room in that 2-week period, but a lot less aggressive, to step down the energy. So I started, really just logically and spiritually connecting things and making that marriage happen within myself, and then showing others how they can do it within themselves. So the biggest thing is that they're the central character in the theme. We understand who the gods are and all that stuff. We just really center around the person being the god and the goddess, and how every single thing that we experience in this reality, we do experience in many cases alone. Because if your eyes close, that doesn't mean all of a sudden I can't see. You're the only one that can't see. So we call it understanding. This is to go back within yourself, forget everything else for a while, cut it all off, and start standing for something inside, and get your energy back, and really get into this and see how limitless it really can be. And the only thing that I've done, because I'm just reporting about my life in real time, I'm actually doing this. I'm not some kind of guru sitting around telling you about what I was able to achieve. And it's really helping, because it's so just right on to what people are experiencing, rather than this lag of 20 years, 100 years, maybe even 1,000 years of principles that we're supposed to be following, but no longer make sense to us.
Wow, thank you. Would you say that you went through a Kundalini Awakening? Was that maybe
most definitely? Now that I especially understand more about Kundalini, like I actually do Kundalini yoga now, because Kundalini is a real thing. I mean, it's not a joke. In fact, that's the whole thing. It's like a lot of this seems fanciful for a person until it cuts on, and then it's scary. And anyone that has taken any kind of substance that kind of raises the Kundalini, such as DMT or ayahuasca, if they've taken too much, they understand what I'm talking about, because it gets to a point to where you're like, oh no, I've gone and done it. I'm drove myself crazy, or I've taken too much, and that to me is where the adept lives. And this is kind of, to me, the biggest difference between those that are out there professing and those that are out there really in it. And it's because it requires you to have so much maturity, because what you're allowed to see and experience, it's like you came to the cosmos and got the t-shirt. And then now somehow you're supposed to wrap this up, because we still live in the matrix. So you're supposed to wrap this up into this little box called a body. And then somehow walk around the matrix, because nobody can, truthfully see, unless they get on the same frequency that where you are, they can't actually see who you really are. Like a lot of people think that, okay, if there's spiritual power, why isn't he shaking the shelf? Well, that's a matter of density. That actually is a matter of the plane that the human body exists on. And that's part of the rules. There's governors here. So there's certain powers that are generally not able to be bought into the matrix. So this leaves, for the most part, people not being able to show how much power and how much ability they really have. But in the event that they get in the same frequency, let's say a group session, or as Dan Winter calls it, even when you're braiding hearts with another person, this can happen with two people, this can happen with a group of people. When you start going on collective lucid dreams, when you start getting into those kind of mechanics, only then can you truly see what is under the skin of most people.
Mm.
And the truth is, the cult level of understanding that is actually within the symbol of the pentagram, that the pentagram is a symbol of spells. That's why a lot of people, they see the Wiccan and they say, oh, the witches, they do spells. But it's actually a symbol of the spell that actually everyone is carrying, because they could easily admit that the pentagram is phi, and the pentagram actually connects to how the body is created, the golden mean, and all these different things. But they never connect all the dots and say, well, actually, that means that our bodies are that spell. And a part of
Mm.
that spell is for me basically never to see who you really are unless for some reason I break the spell.
Mm.
Now, the spell is not just words. It exists. It's animate. So it actually is a wall, if you may, gelatinous as it may be, between who we appear to be and who we really are. And the interesting thing is, on this side of the mirror, if you're only seeing yourself all the time as this human being, then obviously, for sure, after only 2 weeks of this, you're going to start believing that you have this construct and this limit of this construct, which is also the pains that it experiences. It's an inability to fly without device or contraption. Also all those different things that come along with the body that actually are not the mechanics of the spirit. The spirit can fly. The spirit can take on different forms. So the thing is, you learn then that we in fact exist in two different worlds. And for me, I think that the greatest progress that adept could ever have, or neophyte or initiate, I would say neophytes and initiates could ever have, is to realize that. And to realize the difference between the matrix and the collective reality that we live in versus inside, in
Mm.
understanding the atom and all of what is going on within us, which is very unique. Because if you don't, when you attempt to blend those worlds, what can often happen is the chaos and the destruction of at least one of those worlds if you don't know how to stay in balance.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a real thing. I always have to tell people about that. I'm super excited because it worked out for me. I've somehow achieved some type of formula. The only thing I want to do, like I did a series called The Key Maker, is show people how to make keys for themselves. Like, my key is not going to fit your lock completely. You're going to have to figure out how to shave down certain things so your tumblers click. But at least what I can do is I can not only give a lot of advice, I can give and live as an example, and then I can lend the blueprint, which is what I use personally to determine if something is true or false. Okay. And it's because truly, as above, so below, there's the mechanics that we will see exist all the way down into the atomic level, and then all the way back up into the macro level. And when we learn how to find those connections, which has a lot to do with not judging. I tell people that right now, because when you judge, you just kind of cut your mind, so it doesn't get a chance to fully see the story. So when you're able to connect those dots, then life runs like a wheel, because that's what it truly is. You tap back into your perpetual energy, because the wheel was designed never to stop spinning. And you also begin to live life as it really is. So basically, you become a human again. And this, to me, is very rewarding for anyone who chooses to spend that time on themselves. It's also one of those things that it's an investment that you can never lose, because you will always have your consciousness in your being if you know how to guide it properly.
How can we extricate ourselves from what you would call the matrix and exist in our full power as sovereign beings and stay in balance without, kind of flying off into space? How can we find our grounding?
That's a good question. In fact, I'm going to do an entire series. It's called One Life. And it's all about that specifically. And the reason why I call it One Life is because when you really sit down with this and you start, instead of thinking, start knowing, right? What you get to is this mainframe to where when you ask questions, you can really get the truth out of those questions, because you know the answers already. And one of those is about being unique, right? And what uniqueness actually is. And when you look into frequencies and when you find something that's unique, What you find really is you find an orchestra of frequencies that are all playing together that will never be played the same again. And that's who we are. Like even when we come around another person, even if I have a radio in the room, if I have another plant in here, if I have a camera in here, all those change the frequencies of the environment. And even the way they're positioned changes the frequencies of the environment. And you know that when you can completely see the metaphysical realm, obviously with utilization of the third eye. And so what occurs is this epiphany where you realize that every single moment is so precious because it will never be replayed again. And in fact, who we are as beings are so precious that we will never be replayed again. So that kind of actually throws out ideas such as reincarnation and ideas of having to come back and do this again, or even ideas that we did this before. And the reason why I work with this kind of tools with my own consciousness is because I don't need to be storing my energy in the future or in the past. I need the energy now. And in order to do that, then I have to come to agreement that now is the time for me to do every single thing, to become legendary, to create a legend. Now, this is not a fanciful idea or a pipe dream, because when you start realizing where power really comes from and you're serious about it, then you just go directly to the power. Now, since you are the power, that means you have to go directly to yourself. And so what I would tell people is the first thing to realize is, again, the matrix. If you just wanted a brief synopsis of how it operates, you can go into systems like, let's use tarot, okay? And I mentioned this recently. You have, in the English deck, you have 52 weeks in a year, so you have 52 cards in the tarot. You then have this system that basically rolls on itself. That's what the word tarot means. It comes from the word rota, or to rotate. Okay. So you have this wheel then that rolls, and then based on the next thing that's supposed to happen, this is what occurs in your life. They call this zodiac. Those are the systems. So even when you look at these matrices, so that's one of them. That's 52 cards. That's generally what the United States runs on. Then you have another system like I Ching, which is 64 hexagrams, right? And then you have also the codons in our DNA are 64. Then you also have on the chessboard that there's 64 squares on the chessboard, 8 by 8, right? So what you're witnessing just with those two things alone is actually the mathematics behind matrices, the mathematics behind ideas and concepts that keep unfolding over themselves like fire, or pie in the Pandora's box, like new things keep coming from it. So once you realize that, you start to realize that when it comes to the matrix, there's an order here. Now, obviously, as a resistor and a rebel, the last thing we want to hear about is order. And that's how I was for a long time. But this order is different than the way that we believe it at times, like order like the law or the police. This order is more like your orientation. Notice the word or means gold. So your orientation then is actually in the matrix, the stars, because no one can really navigate the matrix professionally without knowing the stars. Now, this word orientation also means that unless you're orientated, like when you go into a new job, that means that you actually don't know where you are. So thus, that's the case with most people. They don't even know where they are or how they got here because they don't know the stars. So it goes on then that also if you're not orientated, but then somehow you're still living in the system, you actually begin to live a fantasy. And this is what people need to realize, that what we've actually built here, and I say we because the matrix is a collective, is actually a fantasy that doesn't actually abide by the mechanics of the order. The order is in the stars and the matrix. And the problem with this would be that we actually wouldn't know what was going to happen next. So we would lose our foresight because all the ancients did is they already knew what was going to happen next. Now, knowing what's going to happen next is not a movie spoiler. So people are like, well, I don't want to know what's going to happen next. Just because you know what's going to happen next doesn't mean you're prepared for it. The goal here is to know what's going to happen next and then start working on getting prepared for what's going to occur. So that way you can do, I think, what the Asians would call the Wu Wei, where you could start steering phenomenal powers into the direction in which you would like them to go. You would realize then that there's a time and a place for everything. So anything that you want to do, anything that you want to get accomplished, there's a specific time and a space for that. And then when you know the order, Once you get ready to achieve and to do whatever it is that you're lining yourself up to do, you can't be impeded. It would be as if one man would stand in the face of the sun to try to stop it in the day. It ain't gonna happen. And you would be moving with that kind of force. So when I'm talking about order, what I'm talking about in the matrix is this is a program, and not a program that none of the people here are real, and all of what people get when they hear that word program, because languages are programs. It's a program that if you punch the right things in, you're always going to get the same results. You punch it in, you get the same results. Now, if you decide though, in your own being, because remember that's separate than the matrix, that you want to do it another kind of way, and you haven't lined it up and calculated it properly, then of course you would reach continuous failure. And so this is what we're talking about. We're talking about first differentiating, the parallax of what the matrix is on and where it actually is right now. Right now, it's basically on the trump card. And when we know what the trump card is, then we know, that's basically the wild card. So wild can be a great thing for people, and it could be a devastating thing for people. It's just all about how you use that unhindered energy. But from that glance alone, as a person who, let's say, is watching the Matrix, like they show in the movie, Cypher's back there, he's watching the screen, and then Neo says, what are you looking at? And he says, basically, I'm just looking at the blonde hair and blue eyes, the red dresses, etc. But basically, the women. But what's really being said is that when you know how to read this matrix, you can actually look and say, okay, what time is it today? Oh, it's that card. They're playing that card. And then you synchronize your clock on where the matrix is. Bam. But that doesn't mean that that's where your personal clock, your circadian rhythm is or should be. So it's then kind of like Superman. You kind of do the Clark Kent during the day, and then you Superman at night. So you do Matrix during the day. Now, make no mistake, you can bring things, and this is what people should know. You can bring things from the spiritual world into the Matrix. You have to just know how to ground it, root it, womb it, and birth it, which is the process. But the thing is that it's more than possible, because the only things that what you're seeing in the Matrix are really made out of is actually light, which is visuals, and sound. Now, the only thing that you really have access to the most in your dream is lights, visual, and you even have a perception of sound. Like people be talking to you and stuff blows up. And so this means that all you really need as far as the prana materia to actually create anything that you want can come from that world, as long as we adapt to that process of understanding that's my process. I bring things, and I was doing that when I was a kid. I bring things from the dream into the reality. And they may not come right away, because that's not the parallax we're on. How you understand this is you understand it in the clock. This is called horology, right? It's a real thing. This is not a metaphysical study. Horology is what you see the guys in Switzerland and the ones who sell the $400,000 or $500,000 watches. That's what they know all about. And the thing is, if we took for one moment to see what the sizes were of those cogs that are put in that represent positions of planets in order to keep this on this 24-hour schedule, then right there alone, we have sacred numbers. We have calculations of the movements of the stars. We have all of that in that one disc. So you see, knowledge is everywhere then. It's just not on a billboard when you're driving down the freeway. And it's just because if somebody did it, not only would they have a really small space to kind of write everything you would need to know on, but also they probably will go broke putting the sign up there, because nobody even cares. And for the most part, it's for each person to decide when they want to self-substantiate in the matrix. The only thing that we can do is we can keep shining the beacon. See, that was my thing. It's like the only problem that I actually had was not that people weren't necessarily awoke. That did bother me for a while. But it was actually that they didn't have the avenues to really go through to get the awakening. When they finally said, okay, I'm done. I'm tired of the suicide. I'm killing myself in the matrix over and over again. The game is over. I keep coming back. I'm blinking like a ghost for a while, and then now I'm here. How do I get out? And the thing is that, do you know, like in the ancient times, there were places all around the world for when you decide you wanted to get out. And, most of the time people did that because they lost a loved one. So generally when someone crossed over, if a person wasn't in the know, they went to become in the know because they needed to know where that person went. And you notice how then that's what really kept us together was the bonds, because the bond that you could have with your mother or your father is totally different than the bonds that we have now. Sister, brother, friends, tribal members, the bonds were so strong when that bond even seemed to be interrupted for a moment with something that was as petty as death. We bridged those disconnections. That's what, one of our powers and abilities are, because we're a spirit with a physical body. We have both worlds in our being. And many of us served as gateways between those two worlds. And so what this gets to then is, because, remember now, we did this like 5 years, even more amazing things after another. And because my thing is I never like to really talk about the same thing twice. So I kept digging and it was rendering more and more and more. But after a while, I started realizing that was actually a part of the whole thing that I needed to stop doing. There's levels to this. I'll tell everyone, like, don't think you're just going to get to the last level on the first day. But there's a certain point where you got to come out of data experiences even and go into knowing, because knowing exists. And I've been able to prove this all knowing. It's not only the Zen state, but it's in most cases the state where a person gets in. Just recently, people have go into comas and they come out and they speak these new languages. One guy went into coma, he came out speaking Spanish. He didn't know Spanish. A lady went into coma, she came out speaking Sanskrit. She didn't know Sanskrit. So where does it come from? And this happens all the time. You're like, even when I get in the dream, I see stuff that I don't know what I'm looking at, like weird languages and all sorts of stuff going on. I don't know that stuff, or do I? And the thing is that, so this kind of cracks through. This is like a sledgehammer through the matrix right now, because then what starts to occur to you is that even notions that we need to all get together. I mean, come on. How can we need to do something that's already done? Like, there's in the all-knowing, we're all together. Everything's collective. If you could harness the all-knowing space, everything that anyone ever will know and ever knew will be at access to you. So ideas like, we need to learn something and we need to come together and all that kind of stuff, that's all matrix stuff. But I didn't say that we don't need to do it. See, this is the crazy part, because the matrix is a play. And that's why, we urge the characters to just shake a leg out there. Like, literally, because that's the only thing that's actually going to really balance out things for most people, is if you come back into this matrix and you just realize that you're unhindered and you can bring so many dynamics of your character into this, and then that's going to fulfill matrix stuff. And that makes life, as far as attaining sovereignty in the matrix, it pushes things in that direction, because now you can start, getting your little garden together, and then you can get your land, and maybe you can do some crowdfunding with some friends, and then, you can build an entire sustainable property and then just create beautiful things. And if you don't want to deal with the world, then do Willy Wonka for a while and just give out your chocolates and then do that, you see. But when you're grinding in there, you're like, the matrix is annoying you. You got this negative attitude. So you can't even do like the first key in Napoleon Hill talks about is the attitude. So, if you're going into a business deal, you're going into some kind of thing that's going to determine whether you're going to be able to sustain yourself or not. But you have this crazy attitude and that's just got this funk because you don't want to deal with the world anymore, then that's going to actually precede you. So what I would say to people is to remember that we've all, or most of us, you can't generalize. So most of us have had points in our childhood to where we believed that we could take this to an entirely different level. I mean, it was beyond the Jetsons for, the Goonies and all this kind of stuff is still in there, right? And some people call that, well, that's mind control. Well, you have to learn how to use that for your advantage then. And to realize that what actually happened in the United States was a very risky plan. Like, make no mistake, the people who developed the United States knew that they were building a new matrix. Because, see, the United States and the United Kingdom are not really that far off each other as far as concepts are concerned. The concepts are to bring people that are from all over the world and then bring them all into this place, and then like a melting pot, let them mate together and all that, and then let them create these new different kind of children. Let's mix the bloodlines. Let's do all these different things. Like look at UK, like they show you in the Olympics. They have a Chinese UK person, they have a Japanese UK person, the black UK person, and they all talk like they're from the UK, but they're all of these different shades and colors of the skin, and that's what they pride themselves on. It's like the colors of Benetton over there. And it's the same thing in the United States, even though they would love to keep playing the racial card because everyone loves to play that card every now and then. The truth is that it's such a diverse melting pot. Nobody can actually say that they're 100%, or few people can actually say that they're 100% really anything. So the truth is to the matter is we have before us something that we cannot run away from, that we cannot say, well, I'm going to just do my own thing and let the world do its own thing, because it will eventually meet us wherever we are. Like I know people that started since Mount Shasta, and they believed a lot of things were going to happen. They were like in the same phase that kind of we are now in this age range are about, at least 2 years ago, kind of before Trump was elected. But this mindset that 2012 spaceships, we're going to, communities and, hedonism, naked, organic, all of those things, hey, that's coming. That's right around the corner. And see, what I do is that instead of like jumping on that train, because I'm an observer, right? So instead of jumping on that train, I have to go back and I have to say, well, did we ever think like this before? And of course, the 70s, 60s was like that. And then the Mount Shasta era was like that. So what we have to say is that, so how do we overcome not being able to achieve that again? And because that's what happened, like whether anyone wants to admit it or not, it could be shamefaced if they admit it, but we didn't actually pull off the mission like we expected. Our children still don't have conscious games. Our overall control of the curriculum, like I can go over and over and over and over again, but see, this is the problem. See, we didn't go where the power was. Like, I don't want to play politics. I don't want to play any of those games because those are all sub-programs. In the real game of the Matrix, the only thing that matters here is the mechanics of the Matrix. That's where the power is. To understand how your chakras connect to certain planets. To understand how each of the organs in your body, as they say organs, are emitting a specific frequency. To know how to test when your organ is not emitting the frequency and how to put a cymatic or something on it so that it can start resonating that frequency. How to actually send an endless flow of energy from your body into someone's body that is decaying. How to infuse elements that you use every single day, like water, with power and energy. Those things, because why we spend a lot of time in this reactionary phase, and this is the key. If we're always reacting, this means that actually we're no different than computers, because that's what computers do. Computers react. We put in the data, they bring the data back. And so that whole reactionary phase that we've been put into, especially in the Western, any state, any country that has a Western culture embedded in it, then the adults even are treated like children. They're not allowed to really ask the big questions and get answers, to take over things. They're basically big kids. They're given all the holidays. If you even notice the programming, like you come in the Latin countries, you see that the programming is very kiddie. Like you get adults dressed up as children. So all this is, adults dressed up as children. So you get all these programs, and what it's all saying in these countries is, hey, be a child, never grow up. We'll be your parent, surrogate nonetheless, like the queen, the president, these kind of people. They, tell you what to do, rule over you, give you rules, etc. Like they're your parent, and then you never grow up. You believe in Santa Claus still, still is trick or treat, and all this stuff is going on. And meanwhile, what's really at stake? Now, this is where, we move into more of a serious thing, because literally serious. What really is at stake here if we don't figure it out? Because I live in that world. I don't have actually the luxury to let someone else figure it out for me, or to, lay into it 2 or 3 weeks with still not any major breakthrough or process. I don't have that luxury. So I would tell people then that what happens if we don't pull this off is actually more catastrophic than if we do, of course. But I say that in an encouraging way. But I just don't like people to think at all that this is a game. And I'm going to explain to you why. It's actually in the word voodoo. So for a while, anytime a person hears this word voodoo, all of a sudden all this spells and darkness and all this stuff comes to their mind, right? And the reason is is because voodoo is actually about the spiritual world. It's not about the physical world. It's about the spiritual world. And the reason why it has so many crazy stories is because, and people are afraid of it, is because that's how the spiritual world really is. There's all sorts of stuff going on in there. And the reason is because if you don't go through this process of building yourself up spiritually, understanding and getting your mind in balance, getting your mind, body, and soul in balance, taking care of the vessel that has been given to you as a gift. If you don't kind of center that stuff up properly, which is up to you, like, trust me, the world is going to do as much as it can to make you feel like you don't even need to know any of this stuff. And it has succeeded in that. People are unorientated right now. But that, if you're on this line, if you're listening to this message, that doesn't have to be you. But the truth is, what do we think could really happen if we don't get ourselves in balance and start to really use our talents, right? Because we have so many things. We have this vision. We have this thinking. We have this smelling. We have, this connection with one another. We have all these different things, but yet we demand more. We want more from these governments. We want more from these legal systems. We want more, more, more. But are we using what we have? And so my thing is that now people right now they're living in actually one of the best times that they can ever live. And it's coming across as this is the worst time. And that's a shame, because if we don't know history, then we won't know to even be allowed to read, not being allowed to read because you're Black, not being allowed to read because you're a serf or you're a peasant. And that was like multiple skin colors. Spiritual knowledge is still, there's a chokehold on spiritual knowledge about stars and, magnifying certain energies coming from stars, those kind of things. So now that information is actually leaking out. You have people, there's Santos, there's Dan Winter, there's Robert Temple, there's some real people that are in this that can give you some keys to what's really going on here and send you on an adventure of your own existence that I think is high time for people to start getting more interested in than the repetitive Groundhog's Day status of the Matrix. Mm-hmm. So, that's what I would have to say like that, is just figure out how to bring your talent and whatever you're doing into the Matrix. I've done that by not just this, doing radio shows and stuff. This is actually now becoming more the thing that I can do on a secondary level. And then what I'm doing now is I'm just going right into inventing. And then now, how am I able to achieve that though? Because you can always have a great idea, but can you make it? And since you got 3D printing that's like on your desktop, they even got laser cutters coming out for your desktop. You can have all this stuff in your garage. So your ability to create ideas and then to push those ideas into the world to create betterment for, just in embedding yourself in what you're doing is now available. If we waste a lot of time in the reactionary still, because that's all they're going to do, it's going to be just like a reality show. They showed us that. If you waste all your time in just to that, you can actually start to imagine that the world's going to be over, that everyone's going to die. See, all of those are prophecies that function like a clock. Like when you really understand the Abrahamic tradition and why it's actually been going on so long is because people's minds are used to fulfill something that goes on over and over again. And this is the fresh part of the world, Eden, the decay, the fall, the revelation, the deluge, the start over. And actually some people, whether they realize it or not, experience that kind of stuff all in 1 year. That they've gotten to certain things that have happened in their life that have been extremely, detrimental to them. And they now, are recovering from that. So, this is a big thing. It's really about, getting answers to any kind of questions that you want to know the answers to. Obviously, I can keep going on about, different variety of things. But the most important thing is for people to ask what they want to know, because you're basically sitting in front of an inexhaustible well. And to try to get everything out of that well is like just one pool is going to be pretty difficult. So
I have one more question before we open up to the community for questions. And that is, this is kind of a two-part question. Are we in like a hologram or a computer simulation? And what are your thoughts on evolution?
Okay, well, okay, just to understand what a hologram is, if you go to the atom, you can go Google it. What does an atom look like under electron microscope? That you'll find that it actually looks like what we call a Megan star or a Star of David. So
Mm.
that star does not come from, that's why they actually relate it to atom because it's the first thing. So, you're basically dealing with most spiritual texts, very deep Kabbalistic writings that they only reveal themselves based on the depth of the person's consciousness and mind. So what it is with the holograms is you have a point-to-point system here. And this means that everything in this system is seeking to basically drop its seed and then genuflect with its seed, meaning like a back and forth, like a reflection between the parents and the children. And in that process, sending energy back and forth to each other. And what this creates is it creates a gigantic energy web that is a point-to-point system to where the reflection of every single thing that's a part of that system is within every single point. So this is what's meant by the system has a holographic nature, because when you're using a holographic field, like if you're proactive, this means that anytime you want to know something, and that's why I say we have an all-knowing state, we can just ping it. You can send it across the many different members of the web. And the reason why it's deemed as very holographic is because there's parts of our brains that function like mirrors. And that's very similar to why you actually see dreams, like why you can actually be in a dream and the whole dream is there. And then, you can see something different, right? So there's a part then we understand that's inside of the brain that allows and projects to us what we see. So the deeper part of what goes on in the matrix and why we believe it's real is because a lot of the things here in the matrix are solid. And what solid is for an organic organism, it's actually the full convincing that it's real, that it actually exists. When something does that, it becomes solid. That's why they call that the great I am. I am whatever I will be and whatever. So that's the I am. And then what happens is that the moment, however, that you stop believing in stuff around you, which again, generally only happens for people if they take some kind of substance, but it will happen to you if you go deep in the meditations. You start realizing that you'll visualize where there's nothing around you, not even a floor. And then you'll start seeing basically a geometric field that expands out so far that you'll realize that the importance of all the geometry. And in that field, what you're really witnessing is basically a gate, the gate between this world and then the all-knowing state, which the Egyptians or the Tibetans called the subjective plane. So this world, again, just to answer the question directly, is very holographic in the sense to how things are aware of itself and how something like the sheer belief that from many of us that tomorrow is going to come fuels a lot of how the tomorrow actually gets here. It's a lot about our abilities to manifest. That's where we start to believe something is going to happen and then it occurs. So there's a lot of things basically that we're experiencing the reality that the moment we're thinking them so fast and then they're appearing, but we think that they're always there. So this is kind of like reverse to how the reality is. So the easiest way to explain that is when you take a step, then the actual step appears. This is how our mind is functioning. This process is going so fast, we've come into believing that all this stuff is actually here, and now we're just stepping through it. And that's not how it works. And you only experience that because remember, if you're trying to base that on everybody else and what everyone else is experiencing, your equations are going to be wrong. If I asked you, give me the frequency of you right now, and you went into adding everyone else's frequency, it's going to be wrong. So we're talking about what's going on with you. And you are personally the person is going through a process to where they're manifesting the reality that's in front of them so fast that they can't realize that they're the ones that are actually projecting that all this is around us and solid, and this is what you're experiencing. And the only way that you'll know that is the moment that you stop doing it. And that happens in deep meditation. You actually disconnect, is what we call it. I think Leary called it tune in, tune out. It's like, turn on, tune in, and drop out. So at the drop out part, that's when you actually detach from this world, and then other things begin. And, so that's what's really, really talked about. That's what's really meant by the holographic nature of the reality. And I think there was one final question that you asked.
Just like your thoughts on evolution. If we're in a sort of computer hologram or something, how do you explain evolution? This has just been on my mind a lot lately.
Yeah, just to understand it, I think that the closest that we're getting to it right now, because we're actually at the point where artificial intelligence is meeting metaphysics. Okay, so and that's actually the close of any society, any system, and then the new system opens again. So do me a favor, just give me the question one more time. I mean, it's
just like, what are your thoughts on evolution? If we're in a sort of computer.
So understanding deep thinking. And that's what I meant to say. So understanding deep thinking, what deep thinking is it's when the computer starts to learn how to adapt to what's going to happen next. And our bodies and many of the organisms that are actually on the planet, like we see a lot of them, they actually have that installed as their firmware. It's like in our instinct. It's actually a part of the core of this planet, which we would say is our mother. And so what happens is that there's this evolution process that actually goes on within every organism, and that evolution is based on its awareness of itself. So for us, a big part of our evolution is actually what's happening right now with the wake-up call, because it's got to come in some way or another. A lot of people are waking up to that, okay, this is not, completely the reality, and all these different things. All that's a part of the evolution. None of that can be pushed under the carpet. However, what we would still have to look at, though, is that evolution, it's a very interesting thing, because that's like saying that your ancestors are in the past. Now, let me clear up the mind a little bit on this. So for us, our ancestors are actually in the past, and we refer to our ancestors like dead people. But the truth is, when you understand the level that the ancestors were on, just as far as their perfection, they're actually not in the past. They're in the future, because their vibration is actually higher and more balanced than we are. See what I mean? So vibration is what determines what's in the future and what's in the past. So if something's on a higher vibration, then it's in the future. If it's on a lower vibration, it's in the past. So the ancestors on a higher vibration. So we think that, okay, the ancestors in the past. So when we refer to them or when we think about them, we think backwards. And thus, we never are able to really communicate with them. So in taking that in the same state of consciousness, we now bring that into the scope of the question about evolution. Now, how can we actually say that we're getting better or evolving if the direction that we're actually moving is more like de-evolving, meaning that we're kind of getting further and further away from the truth? We can only say that it's evolution if the person is coming closer to oneness. And the easiest way to put this, I've figured out, is we're doing a lot of work right now. We're all doing work, and we're all getting ourselves in a better position because, there's been a lot that's gone on. Yeah. But in truth, if you say it from a sliding scale, let's say you have 0, then you have -1, -2, -3, and that goes in that direction. Then you have +1, and then that goes in that direction. Where a lot of people are is actually the -5, right? And when they learn something or when they gain a level, they go to -4 and they go to -3, but they're not in the positives yet. And this is the easiest way to kind of explain how evolution is working for us. We're learning a lot of things right now, so we're moving up through the negatives because we've had a lot of damage that's done to our DNA and a lot of damage that is done to our lineage. And, all that stuff has taken some damage. So when we're fixing those things, we're getting closer towards the positives. And then hopefully, eventually, soon, most people will begin to hit 0. And then they could start moving into the 1, 2, 3, 4. And what that is seeing the rewards of what, eating the right thing and what, allowing your mind to be clear and what all that stuff actually equals. So of course, in the, let's say in the negatives, a person can be doing a lot of things, fasting and cleansing and doing a lot of things to get out. And then they're not necessarily seeing the rewards of that right away. And they're like, man, you know what? I don't even feel like that this stuff is even working. And they're not realizing, well, it depends on how deep you kind of got yourself in. So obviously we encourage those kind of people to just stick with it. But again, the evolution is, here's another thing that I'll lend to that question. This is another thing that will really let you understand what's happening. Now, if you understand the distance between these celestial bodies, which now people have gone into believing that they don't actually exist, but if you understand the distance, what it at least says to you is that whatever could live there is either extremely primitive because of the time gap or extremely advanced. Only one or another. The probability of us going to one of these local planets, which is still very far away, I'll use this all as a concept, and finding people that are just like us and doing exactly what we're doing it ain't going to happen. It's just based on the distance. So this means that what then would an evolved being have to really say to a human from Earth right now? And then likewise, what would a very primitive being have to say, if anything, to a human from Earth? So what we realize then is that any kind of ideas like aliens, evolution, all these kind of things are so open-ended. I find that they're placed in the mind at times to keep us kind of going in this loop that never gets us to, hey, what do we need to do? Now, if the question is, how can we evolve? Right? So let's put it into another perspective. How can we evolve? How can I jump this thing up? Can I hack this thing? And the truth is, yes, that when you understand the principles of what we're really dealing with here, like ancestors are in the future, not in the past, pretty much every single thing that you're looking at in front of you on a spiritual level has actually been hijacked from some culture. And generally, the people who are the custodians of it now are saying they represent it, whether it's a symbol or whether it's an entire dogma, are not the original representatives. And that in most cases, the big game that just recently went on is that anything that looks like it has power or people can fear it, then the conquerors took that on as their sign and symbol. So we can even see this kind of stuff in symbols like the pyramid, symbols like the eye on top of the pyramid, these kind of things. All this stuff, this stuff comes from ancient cultures. But a group of people have taken that, and societies have taken that and now represent it another kind of way and have people thinking that, oh, that's what that means. So the truth is that evolution is getting the truth to what all that stuff means, going into your ancestry if you have to, going into your inner being if you have to pull out and to extract what you truly are. And that's going to bring about the evolution. Because to me, that's happening because my dreams, I can't even call them that anymore. Like I slide into other realities. I might be in a reality that's running just like this one. And I can't even feel, in a sense, to feeling the difference between that I'm here and there. You could see different changes in the reality. Maybe people are wearing more futuristic clothes. Some people are everyone's wearing all the same thing, all those different things. But, and this is showing you where the mind, like what the mind is capable of doing, what the spirit is capable of doing. And so I still go on journeys. Like I do a lot of, nailing a lot of this down because I found that there's a lot of power in crystals. There's a lot in geometry. Crystals have a geometric shape to them. There's a lot in lasers. So we take then a lot of this, what's seen as ancient technology, and start to really, really apply it in modern times because that's what's going to allow us to evolve, because that stuff is actually coming from the future and not the past. So, I think that's the best explanation of understanding the whole evolution process and how you can make it central to what you're experiencing now versus kind of imagining that the earth on a collective level is going to evolve into something greater because there's evolution and there's de-evolution, right? So, that's 100% what I feel is going on. So I know what we can do this. I know there's some people that want to ask some questions. If I could just get some water really quick and then I can be ready.
No worries.
We can dive into this really deep.
Sure.
Or we can come to the surface.
Greetings. Can you hear
Hello?
me? Hello, can
Yes.
you hear me?
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So, greetings. So, you were talking about the Matrix. If you believe this is an actual Matrix computer simulation, do you feel you can prove that?
I think that what happens is that the term matrix has become very confused with the movie The Matrix, and this I guess comes from our inability to understand organic technology, right? And it's because like if just because it has skin on it and it bleeds somehow, that could be put into one category. They call that the organic, and then actually crystals are in the category of inorganic. It's like if you check the dictionary. So what I'm saying is that if you go to the temple of Edfu, like even if you type into Google Edfu CPU, right, you'll find out that the temple of Edfu is actually a gigantic mainframe, a database in itself, like basically how a computer is built. It's just on a larger scale. And so if you take just that and you can say, okay, well, what does a computer really consist of, right? It has the motherboard, right? And the motherboard is what's hosting all of the equipment that's on the board, right? So we could say that that's Earth, that's the ground of Earth. Then it has the circuitry running through it, right? So that's the stars. The stars literally are actually connecting with each other. When you open the third eye, you see that the stars are not just dots, but they're actually lines and they're connecting with one another. And then you have the hard drive, right? And that's the collective consciousness. That's actually what's storing all the data, right? And then you have the memories, actually, which is one of the most important parts of the system. And even for us, our memories are actually one of our most important parts of our existence. Without our memories, we're basically nothing. Our memories give us power. So the entire system, actually, when you look at it from that perspective, you can actually divine then the purpose of a matrix. The purpose of a matrix is to generate energy, right? And generating energy is done through memories, meaning you need to have some experiences. So the more people and the more animals and the more entities we can get into the matrix to cause more experiences, the more energy is being developed. Okay. And all of that, what I just explained to you, actually does take place inside of a computer, except for us harvesting the energy from the memory chips, which is done in scalar technology, but just outright us harvesting the energy from memory is not really done with our desktop computers, but it is done with our quantum computing systems. So basically what I'm telling you is that there's a space where this merges, and the easiest way to explain this sometimes is like from the level of a computer, because all of what we're seeing in a computer was actually pulled out of the temples in Kemet. And that's why what you find, let's say Apple, there's a bitten apple. And that's a symbol of actually Pythagoras cracking into the pie and the power that comes with that, the Platonic solids, etc. That's supposedly knowing the knowledge of God. And that's why in the Garden of Eden, there's the apple, and then, they eat it, and now they know good and evil, and all that goes on in that direction. These are all hints to what those scriptures actually mean. So if I did use more technical terms in trying to explain how the matrix functions, and that gave you like an inclination that I'm talking about something of a hard solder and wire system, that's not what I'm talking about. This is more or less full on wet work. And organic, or what we will call fleshly systems, are used, but in the process, because it's still binary, the whole good and evil, the back and forth, the night and day, we can sometimes live in the binary state, which actually is one of the more aggressive sides of the matrix. That's when there's actually a God. That's why they call God Deus, which means two. It's a divisive kind of state. And then when you move into the trinary, right, which is actually when computers move over to trinary, that means that they're actually able to give themselves input. So this creates like an arbitrator between both parties. So what I do is that I had to kind of find, honestly, if you wanted to see how the matrix really works, you would look into a quantum computer. You wouldn't look into like the computer on the floor. You can get a lot of metaphors from it, but only until you start understanding quantum computing, because what quantum computing does is it uses other spaces. This is the terminology. They say English actually doesn't have the capacity to actually explain quantum computing. And what this means is that They only can give you just hints about it, but our code doesn't contain enough to explain to us what's really going on inside of those units. But what they're doing is they're using other spaces to calculate problems that are so big that they can't be calculated in this space. And how that will work for us, like, because you got to bring it into, the perspective of, well, how does that benefit you? Or, what does that mean? It means that there's so much of you that it's hard to bring it all into the matrix. It's almost impossible. You will blow the matrix. So there's limitations. That's why I said there's the governors that are even put on the bend in your eye. And this is like in the Egyptian knowledge, the Kemet knowledge, they show you how the geometry within the eye, but the sheer fact that your eye is curved a certain way, it doesn't actually allow you to see certain things that you would say are slightly out of your visual range. But then when you pull your power from that vessel, and then you fuel the other vessel that can do that, which is the first layer of the spirit body, then all of a sudden you can see more of, what we're talking about with the geometry and how this stuff fits in. So, that's what I mean by when I'm saying, a matrix in a tense. Now, when we talk about proving it, because that's what was presented, because of course I would have to prove it to myself. I wouldn't want to go ranting and raving about something and completely go in the wrong direction. After all, I could just go manage companies and make money and do all that kind of stuff, right? So the truth is that what happened to me was I got in, or I guess you could say I got out, and then I couldn't keep causing that phenomena like on cue. Like that was my thing. It's like I just wanted to be able to get out of the body on cue. When I would just get out of the body on certain times, I never would know what was actually causing the phenomena, especially when I started doing the cleansing. Because remember, this is a process. So it's like climbing up Mount Meru. You're just climbing a damn mountain for a while. And, I learned a lot just from the whole experience, but it was a lot of mental, right? And then when I came to Costa Rica, I met a doctor that knew everything about the body. And he knew a little bit about what I was saying, but he was fascinated. So he said, the deal that we're going to make is that I'm going to teach you everything about your body and you're going to teach me everything that you know. And once I start learning about the body, it took things to a whole nother level, because he was an older guy. So he even said, I like what you're really saying, but I want to hear what you're going to say after you get cleaned out, because a lot of our thoughts and a lot of the way when we act and our reactions, all that stuff is coming from filters, if you may, in our body that are often clogged or often kind of off balance, right? And then when we put them back into place, then all this stuff kind of opens up. So for me, because I can't, make another person believe that there's an outside the matrix, et cetera, all I can do is just show all the connections. But for me, I have to really live it. So personally, I've been on about 100, I think I'm at 140 journeys right now. I got the frequent flyer pass. And this is basically, sometimes I take off on Diamond Tree, what some people call DMT. Sometimes I take off just with the breathing, because that's how I started. Like I actually didn't use any kind of substances. We have a joke about that. Actually, we used to call those white people's drugs. No offense, but it just meant that the LSDs and the DMTs and all that kind of stuff was not, what we were going to be taking. But what happened is that I started off with breathing, and I learned the power of breath. Like I started off with this technique called whole body breathing, and then after I came to my senses a little bit, I kept hearing about DMT and and its effects, and then somehow it made its way to me. And I mean, it just took things up so many more notches, and it started allowing me to basically connect how the matrices are put together, because by that point, I probably had read about 15,000 books. I think I'm up to about 25,000 books. The person wants to understand, how do I read that many books? Because I just turn books into audios. I have either a machine that can do it, or, depending on what shape the book is in, that I can turn it into audio. And then I'll be at the gym listening to a book. People are like, what are you doing? What are you listening to? And it's like, I'm deep into something that I just been following a keyword. So it's taken me quite a bit, because, if you ask questions directly, then I can give you answers. But all the way from the Sumerian times, all the way into Punt, which is Nubia, then Kemet, and then, streaming all the way into these different areas, there's some very, very profound knowledge and information. And then not only just that, there's a lot of proof of what I'm actually talking about So it's just like what you really want to know, because like, for instance, a lot of people say, well, where are the extraterrestrials, right? And where are these other beings at? And the truth is they're actually here. They just reside generally on a variety of wavelengths. And when they're solid, they'll come across as something like a praying mantis, or something that you've seen in the ocean, or something that to you doesn't even have much quote unquote sentience, but that's it's seed. That's the only way I can explain to you. We're seeds, right? So there's even another archetype above us. There's one even below us. So the world that's directly below us, the humanoid beings there actually have horns. That's like one of the processes that things went through previously. The one, which is Earth 6 right above us, the beings actually have two attached appendages. So they actually have what we would see as wings. And then where we are is we're sandwiched kind of in between the two, but we're just one life form. Then there's still the ants. There's those kind of collective family groups that when you go up a couple notches, there's something totally different as far as their intelligence level. But the same way that you would have to work with trying to communicate with the praying mantis here is actually akin to the same way that even if you were on the spiritual plane where it's more sentient, of how much you would have to work with attempting to communicate with it there. And it's because of the language. So now if you remember that in this book is the Bible, which is actually the most benevolent and most malevolent book. So in the book, then one of the most malevolent acts, there's actually the disruption of our entire genome, if you may. It's the process of the breaking of the bridge. And the reason why this is so important is because we all actually used to realize that we played in this spectrum of color, each of us a role. And with holding up our role, then we created a bridge between our world and the world that you're asking about. When that bridge was broke, which you'll actually find mentioned in most ancient traditions, what happened was there was an extreme disconnection between the living and the dead, because that's what the bridge connected, the place where we are versus the place that you go. So what happened is that we come to basically this realization now that we need to basically put this bridge back together. And until we put that bridge back together, then there will always be a disconnection between where, if you've ever lost a loved one before, where that person has went versus where you are now. And yeah, so I guess that's as much as I can say about it, unless there's, just something specific asked, because, these topics, they're very heavy topics, but they all have very concise explanations. So I guess the biggest thing to ask is, if you want to know exactly where something is, then I can tell you.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, I see the matrix metaphorically, but as a literal thing, I don't really think that's the case. And if it was the case, how would you get to the true world? So if we're in a simulation where programs or AIs...
Let me answer that right there. First of all, the word matrix etymology means a matrix, as in, like a maiden. So basically it's just a womb. So that's what I was saying about thinking something's artificial or thinking something is synthetic is just based on our concepts and what we've been taught. So when we say a matrix, we're saying basically a place where things are cultivated, right? So there's many places of cultivation, just like in the ocean, there's a place that stuff is cultivated and that you don't even know what's going on in there. Likewise, inside of your own body, bacteria could even be cultivating, all sorts of stuff is cultivating. There's life in there that you may not even be thinking about. So what happens is that, to answer the question of how do you get from this matrix, which the first thing is you would have to get into the matrix. See, we think that even our presence here alone equals that we're tapped into this mainframe, like mother brain, the mega mind, and that you've actually can put your tentacles or your roots from your feet down in the earth to connect with the amethyst veins and all the other crystalline veins, and then basically plug in. Like you're just basically the king of the earth or the queen of the earth. And that was like the ancient level of things. But, now we're still getting that back. So it would really, really be easier for you then to determine the difference between the matrix, like when you're completely plugged into it, versus who you really are. Because the matrix, that's why I said it's Gaia's dream. The matrix has actually identified its I am'd itself. It has an ID versus who we are. Like that's why, there's Earth and, there's everything here. And that's why it can be mapped. That's why it can be scaled. It has an ID. So everything outside of the ID, or even what they call the id, it's an actual term. Everything outside of the id is all there really is. It's everything all as a totality. And the only reason why we separate those two spaces is actually because one is more like a lie and an illusion, is more like a matrix. And the reason is because division exists there. So lies and illusions are actually based on how much density something has. You see what I mean? So if something is more closer to illusory, then it's more illusory. It doesn't, it doesn't. It's not static. Okay. And then when it's more closer to the truth, then it's more solid. So this is what we're talking about. Because if I for 1 minute, if you saw who you really were versus the skin suit and the vessel that you put on right here, you would be like, yeah, that's just an illusion. It can't even start coming close to who you really are. And the way you know that is the difference between the all-knowing versus the id or the ID and who one thinks they are. And trust me, like this stuff, it could be so shattering to the reality, or it could be empowering. But either way, it kind of demands as a spirit, not as a man, not as a woman, but as a spirit, that you actually figure this thing out. So all I've done is gone deep into, if I have to accept something in order to get to the next level, then I look for empirical proof, no different than you asking this question right now. But then there's certain things that you actually have to, and this is where I went to the highest level that I've been to yet, is actually a process of letting go. And because I was always in the state where I felt like that I always needed to maintain consciousness. So I would even get into some of these highs, if you may, again, breathing or whatever, and I would still be holding on with the monkey mind, like seeing it all, experiencing all the geometry and all that. And just, it's like a dog with his head out of the window going 200 miles an hour. That's how high the energy is. And anyone that has been outside this framework knows what I'm talking about. But I would still be holding on to the monkey mind. And in that, I couldn't perceive. And remember, after 100 and something journeys, you get to a point where you're in a 101 a lot of times with this oversoul, whatever, asking questions like, well, why can't I? And what was being explained to me is it's about the construct you're trying to put it in. You can't fully come to realization of what's really here because you're holding on to that. And as long as you're holding on to that, you're coming in here with something that's not even calibrated to experience this. So I said, okay, so I guess that means when I finally get into that realm, I'm just going to lose my mind. It's not going to be James Bomar anymore. And I definitely don't want to do that. So I would stay at the gate. And this is what I did for a long time in many journeys, is didn't go too far, but always taking off. And then one day I was listening to Daniel Winter, and he was talking about slow waves, because I have a lot of equipment. Like, I don't know if I'm not sure if this is your first time hearing me or whatever, but if you see my profile, like, I'm deep into fringe. So I have, GB4000s and vortex and printing plates and fractal antennas and lasers. And I got all of that stuff, just in the pursuit of figuring out, hey, what happens when you die? And in a part of that, I used to always go for the high frequencies, right? So it's like, I just felt like whatever heaven was or whatever the next level of this was in high frequencies. So when I would go on these journeys and things, I'd be having this equipment all cranked up, and I would get something, but I could never really grasp what I was experiencing. So one day I'm listening to Dan Winter, and he says, yeah, in the high frequencies, it's short, they're short waves. So in short waves, there's short memory. And I said, you know what? That makes sense. And he said, and then long waves, like those 4 hertz, 5 hertz, 6 hertz, what we would perceive as base, there's long memories. And if you're in Earth is at 7.83 hertz, it's not at 20,000 hertz. So if you're not basically tapped into those slow, long waves, then you won't have the memories. You won't be able to get the memories of Earth. Then what happened was I said, okay, well, let's see if I can put this to practice, because I have a place that I can test out whether something works or not. So I get the slow, long wave frequencies going, and, I use the formula. And then right around this whole thing, because you know how everything is synchronistic. What I was being showed is how to relax, because I've met at least two people, but two people that I can know bona fide that get in and out of the matrix. One of them scares the hell out of me, and the other one I still think something's going on with them. So I'm not really in contact with either one of them. But in the sessions that I've talked to them, both of them mentioned their ability to relax. Now, for me, Mr. Resistor, Mr. Resistance, and all that, I was like in the opposite direction of relaxing. I felt like relaxing was the person who wanted to cop out of this. Relaxing was the person who wasn't like tapped in and ready to ascend. And, it's like an ADD version of getting at this spirituality. So what happened is that I remembered that they would always say that I need to relax. So what I did in the next journey that I went on with the long wave was I went into a relaxation, but so deep that I decided that I was going to play dead. Now, this is how personally I hacked the matrix, because there's certain things that you learn, but you don't really take it in as that it's important until you realize it and see it. The first thing is every action, there's a reaction. So every thought, there's something that comes back from that thought. So if you're thinking and you're on one of these experiences where you're about to try to get out of your body, most of the time you can't get out of your body, because with every action, there's a reaction. So it kind of keeps you inside the body. And the thing that's giving you the reaction is what we've dubbed as the sentinel. The sentinel is basically the thing. It's like, I can only explain it to you as a quantum computer, because it's capable of doing it with all the organisms that live here. For every thought, for every idea that they are themselves, for every fear that they have, there's a reaction sent back that actually keeps them static and solid in the matrix. But if you happen to play dead during one of these, you're going up the ladder, and instead of sending out these high vibrations of, you saying, I can't believe what's happening to me, or, oh, this feels amazing, or whatever you're sending out, if you just play dead and the energy is still moving, all of a sudden you get into this wave. It's like a vapor. And then in this wave and vapor, you literally feel like your whole body just smear. That's what it feels like. You just all of a sudden smear out of yourself. And once you smear out, what you get into is this, I'm not sure if I can articulate it properly, but it's basically like a huge bird of energy. And you can feel there, because you're not doing any thinking, because thinking starts pulling you out of it, that everything that you ever need to know is there. So now you've at least made it past the sentinel. So now this process that goes on next is you learning the new language. Okay, and this is the big key. You know this language because this language is Kabbalah. See, Kabbalah means oral resuscitation. It means that it's transferred to you from mouth to mouth, basically, from your own mind to your consciousness. So you know how like sometimes you'll be in a session or whatever and you move your hands a certain way, or, you do something that you didn't read anywhere, you just know what to do. That's what Kabbalah really is. When you get into these higher levels, you start hearing suggestions of things that work and that you should do. And you won't find that really written anywhere. So that's the real Kabbalah. So this is the thing of the process, because it's not that, I need to just basically rub this genie and then the genie is going to pop out and then it's going to start granting my wishes. It's not like that. It's trial and testing and learning how to troubleshoot. Because the other thing is, this is not a one size fit all. That's the whole conundrum with being unique, is that you then need to actually figure out what is the crossover of what I just explained in your world. It could be slow waves, but it could happen to be you slowing down on certain things. You see what I mean? So what I can do is I can give pointers. Again, if you understand my character, that's where a lot of this stuff is about mentorship. I didn't believe that in the beginning. I really believe every person for themselves, all this stuff. But I'm starting to realize more and more that there's this power in mentors, because mentors we trust. And actually at the end of all this, all we're really stuck with is trust. So the less that we trust each other, the more that we end up having to go through, the more we have to end up banging our heads on things, just because we're not learning it from anyone anymore. We don't have elders. And man, the spiritual field, see, all the stuff that I did before this, like I was a computer engineer, I went into entrepreneur, I rented exotic cars, I had an exotic car company, the real estate, I did all those kind of things. And I knocked that stuff out. All you do is you find the person who's doing it the best, and then you improve on their weaknesses, and then all of a sudden you're better. It's not rocket science. So I thought that when I got into spirituality, it was going to be somewhat of the same thing. I was going to find the one who did it best, and then, I was going to be there. Years and years and years and years of keywords and off on tangents. The Masons got about, 6,000 or 8,000 books just by themselves of just rhetoric, disinformation. You may get bored on Plato and Socrates and hoping there's some kind of gem in here. And then, there's just basically so much of it out there. But I went through all that stuff, but I had the experience. So I had the experience first. And then I had all these books to interpret to me what I had gone through. And so that's why it was easy for me to say, okay, this person is just basically saying what they read from this person, or this person is actually onto something. Okay, I haven't heard that before. Let's pull all their books. And the only reason why I would do something like that, my good friend, is because remember, this is still about my soul. Like, it ain't about my soul, your soul, her soul, and all these people's soul on the phone. That's not what soul means. Like, it's still about your soul. So I would have to be, because of the way that I was raised, I would have to be ultra concerned about my soul. So I could never tell myself a lie. And that's what happened again within all these traditions that I went through, even in the Islam, the Gnosticism. Like, I was heavy in there. But at a certain point, I would be like, I'm seeing a lot of flaws here. Like, I'm seeing things that, I'm reading it directly, and this is not resonating. So I was then forced to either leave my power, stay there, stay dumb, keep the power they've given you, because there's power in these traditions. There's a lot of power in belief and faith. See, what happens is that there's so many things that, let's say, places like churches and places like mosques do have that attract people, that often they roll all that stuff into the whole bundle, though. Like, if people think like you think, right? If someone can go ahead.
Excuse me. Yeah, let me hold you up for a second.
Okay.
You mentioned you were into computer engineering, so is it safe to assume that you're familiar with programming?
Yeah, I'm not a programmer. I'm more in hardware, but I'm very familiar with programming as a concept.
Okay. And like, going back to what you're saying, like, what I was asking, I really don't want to get caught up on this question, because this is really my main question I was waiting to ask you. I just wanted to touch on this since you guys brought it up. But if this was a womb, or if this was a simulation, how would one truly be birthed, or how would one escape? So like, if this was a program, or if you were just waiting to be born, where's that exit point?
This is like the last question in the matrix of basically, where does nothing come from? And I was only able to personally satisfy my thirst for wanting to know the answer to that question just recently, because that's actually where you're at. Because what you would be asking yourself is, if this started somewhere, then what's before that? And the only thing that I was able to come up with to satisfy that was understanding the all-knowing state, that there is a point of reference that we do have within us that does give us all the knowledge, and it does reside there, whether we can access it or not. It's like basically the core. To me, it's atomic. It may even be down to the nano of its instructions and information of existence. It doesn't allow itself to be defined. This is the only way that we continue the perpetual will, because we're naturally attracted to it. Meaning that if you figured it out, you wouldn't ever. Do you understand what I mean? It's like, there's nothing to drive the wheel, so existence wouldn't be as you know it. That would be us, determining where nothing actually comes from, right? So this creates this paradox in our reality, and that to me is and you're right on it, because this is what causes all the questions. Because at the end of the day, yeah, but where did that come from? It's the same thing as what a kid can ask you. Okay, remind me, well, where did God come from? And then you'll end up stuck there. And the truth to the only answer to that, because see that's where you know the limitations of the matrix. You're right on it. Your question is the answer. You're proving to yourself just within that alone that the question and the answer actually meet at a certain point. That there's this all-knowing state that doesn't have a beginning. We want to, because we believe in beginnings and ends in this relationship of what we got going on earth. We want to know the beginning and end of it. And that's what it won't allow. It won't allow itself to be put into that kind of canister. And then this creates this paradox for us if we can't just get over it. And that's the thing with the all-knowing. See, thought or thoth is the one who created this matrix or construct that you're in. If you want to go a little bit deeper, if you want like hardcore answers or something you can look into, Thoth, that's why it's known as the god of writing, language, all that kind of stuff, everything that creates the matrix. And that's where thinking comes from. Now, thinking is going to keep going. Like I've done so much thinking, I don't think anyone can outthink me. But that's just one of my thoughts. So what happens is with thinking, doesn't ever actually stop. Every answer that you get, it has another question. And then what happens if you get caught up in that vicious cycle? What happens is you get removed from your all-knowing. And that's a whole part of how the matrix is constructed, to move you from all-knowing. Because once you come out of all-knowing, now you get into time. See, we have to treat all these components not as their theories and concepts, but that they're actual real energies. Time is a real energy, and time is, geez, I mean, you're talking about Saturn. Right?
Yeah, but there has to be an escape, or there has to be a way to transcend these so-called gods.
The escape is within. You know, if you're just wanting to know how to get out, you want to get out of the maze. You stop walking down the same corridors, imagining that that's the way out. That's what thought does. Thought will have you going down all these corridors in your brain. Remember that's what the labyrinth is, right? So when they make that pattern, that indigenous pattern of the maze, that's actually the patterns of the brain. And then when they put that down into the I think that was Salisbury or wherever they put that down onto the earth, they created a place that functioned as in a ritual way to walk you out of your own mind, basically to talk you down from suicide. So to get out, what you have to do is actually get in. You have to get back in your body. See, believe it or not, you know, and I'm not generalizing here, but we have this ability of thinking that we're actually inside of our consciousness and we're actually totally awake, and we're not. And of course, that's what a part of the awakening is. And to do that, you got to crack the shell. And for each person, cracking the shell is different. Because if I send you off on some kind of psychedelic journey and that happens to not be for you, then it's not going to help you anymore. And if I send you off on some kind of dietetic journey and that's not what your real issue is, then that's not going to help you. You have to know, what is my diet like? You have to turn this clock and say, mind, body, and soul, tri-merge this. I need to be orientated. What's going on? Mentally, physically, and spiritually, where's my Achilles heel? Because there is something that wants to keep you in the matrix indefinitely. I mean, that's kind of obvious at this point. So to break through that is, you know, that's each person's breakthrough. And what I've done is, and this is what I have to tell you, I've put together hundreds of recordings that are the step-by-step process of a person figuring out for themselves what is the way out of their own matrix. You see what I mean? And so, again, there's the body, there's the mind, and there's the soul, or what I just term as the spirit. And when you look at three of those, you have to go into those and say, am I sharpening those? Because once all those three are sharpened, then you're exiting. And the exit is a vivid thing. Like, we're talking about that this is a real thing. It's not just a click inside the mind. For sure, there is a way out and there's a way back in. And what you realize is that you're not just here to get out of here. You're actually here to figure out how to get out, how to help others get out, how to get back in, and how to actually bridge this space that we're calling the matrix that we're so tired of right now, because no longer is the great mind running it. It's all in chaos. But how to get back and forth between those lanes. So again, just to answer your question generally, for sure, there's a way out of the matrix. I mean, I've come out of the matrix. I've met people also that come out of the matrix. It's not something that is depicted like it's on the movie. It's just you come back in because you have an agreement here. Like this body, homie, if you didn't know it or not, this is a pact. Like this is the agreement. When they're talking about, these angels that went into this agreement on the Monoharmon, this is the stuff that you will have to know before you can ever think about getting out of the matrix, because there's a few more fields beyond this before you even start getting up to what they call outside. So
Yeah,
this means that you need. Go ahead.
To me, that's all. To me, that's all the trap. That's all the stuff when they want you to be stuck in this system and they want you to come back, or say you have these type of contracts or agreements. And if someone's to truly be awake to the world, technically that's being dead to the world, because if you even play those etymology games. But let me set that to aside for a minute and ask you about like the Philosopher's Stone, because if one was to transcend or make it to that godhood we can manifest in a second, and not just in dreams or trips or things, but like I said, I want to be standing right behind you or behind Christina, in a snap I could do it and I'm physically there. Do you believe the Philosopher's Stone exists? And if so, what would you say it is, or do you have the recipe?
For sure, the Philosopher's Stone is basically the distillation of who you are. It's the actual synthesis process, because you've seen they had the Philosopher's Stone and they were telling you that it was the P. And sure enough, if you do actually put yourself through the process of what it was talking about in that book, you will come out with some pretty potent stuff. But the truth is that's what the monotomics, that's why monotomics played such a key component to the Philosopher's Stone, and why it was all centered around alchemy. And it's because it's just a distillation process. It's attempting to take something through the same process that your body may take a sandwich through when it takes a sandwich, and then out of that it creates semen, or it creates an egg for a female. And what was witnessed in that process, and which is why the alchemical vessels in many cases were the same shape of organs or holding the same mass as organs, is the process of how to come into full life. So basically how to reach your peak. And in that peak point, then you have access to all of those cities. Like if you're looking for specifically what they're called, SIDDHAS, which are these abilities to, be infinitely small, move through different spaces, etc. But we're looking at a society now that, so remember, so you got you, and then you have this other envelope around you that also is making its own decisions that you're tapped into one way or another, like whether it's you have to go to work or whether it's you have to communicate with certain people there. So there is some communication from that environment. And that environment doesn't exactly promote this state that you're looking to reach. So 100% what we're talking about is that if you can distill, purify, and refine yourself, then you have indeed found the way out. And for me personally, that is exactly the process that I had to go through. But it hit me in different ways. Like I can't say again that everyone is going to go through this process the same way. Like me personally, like it started with people that I had given an impression of who I was, and that impression stuck with them. And that's kind of even what they thought and dreamed I was. Now, according to your concept, none of that even matters. That's all part of the trap. And I would love to believe that. But that's almost like saying that if we've done damage to certain states of our consciousness, that we don't have to kind of work our way out of that damage in order to get into another phase or another state. And so it's basically like getting out of the negs. And I'm willing to do that work, because even if you look at, again, Napoleon Hill, it talks about from nothing comes from nothing comes from doing nothing comes nothing. You have to be willing to make a sacrifice. So as equally as you've embedded into this, you have to be able to even that up with the energy to get out. Or else, to me, it's like you can stick your head in the sand, and we've done that before, but you'll still have to come back up to say, okay, what is the real solution? So for sure, I mean, what you're saying about that's what the paradox is. Like, yeah, buying more into what exactly is going on here and thinking that you need to undo things does get you more raveled into the matrix. Yes, but you got to have that switch. You got to go into the matrix. Yes, and you can operate in the matrix and move your piece along, move your player along in the matrix. But at the same time, you have the power and you have the ability to switch immediately over to another state that doesn't have anything to do with the matrix. And that's your power. So it's kind of difficult to ask, why was I made that way? And, what is the purpose of that? But that's actually what's really happening. And that's what makes this thing so paradoxical, where on one end, it's the same knowledge, because look how everything is the same thing. If it has any real power attached to it, that same thing can be very destructive. And I've seen that in so many levels, like even given what I thought was wholesome, good, deep level sound knowledge, and then seeing people take that knowledge and start doing other things, making sigils and all sorts of stuff, and doing basically what you said, hey, don't do it. Don't do that with this. So that's how every single thing is. And we need to learn how to, I think we give so much power to it. We make it like it's so hard to be here and so hard to deal with what's going on in reality. But man, if we've ever seen really hard before, just think about it,
But that could be a matter of perspective, though. Like, what if everyone has a case of
100%.
Stockholm syndrome? Like, what if they have Stockholm syndrome to the system and they're just not trying to leave? But so, do you think it's possible for us or people here to be able to have those type of abilities? Where I said I could teleport behind you or Christina, like right now, and manifest it in a second.
100%. Let's just get right into it. Well, how does that kind of stuff even go about? Now, first of all, you got to realize that there's people doing that now. And that's why, there's enough compilation of the Dynamo Jack, Qigong Master, Nigong Masters to show you what the real power is when you're cultivating Kundalini. And even to a point to being able to move things in the physical reality with Kundalini is actually a lot of Kundalini on the spiritual realm. And that's why they say, honestly, the fun starts when you go to sleep, when you actually don't have to move this lethargic thing around and try to use your power in relation to that. So the biggest thing is to realize the environment that those people put themselves into in order to be able to basically walk their Kundalini up their spine like a thermometer goes up. So that's why knowledge is measured in degrees. Temperatures are measured in degrees, right? And then in masonry, the levels are measured in degrees. And this is because how many degrees of the fire or Kundalini can you really handle before you start slipping some wheels, right? And so all of this process, because, teleporting around people, seeing what's actually in the other more illusory kind of plane, or actually the more of, it's not physical. So basically you're seeing everything that's non-physical, being able to deal with that. Because remember, all this stuff these are real things. So how much of that can you really handle? And so what was done is that you would put yourself through this process. See, people thought for a while that actually the earth was a benefit, because when you're in the spiritual plane too long, because there's no actual foundation there, you can get loopy. That's the easiest way that I can explain it. In fact, even with the negative traditions that you're seeing out here, the main entity that runs that, the reason why that entity is insane is because it spent pretty much a lot of time on what we would call the astral plane and never being able to make it back into a physical world to where you can actually ground yourself. Ground is important. So what happens is that, so what you're asking then is yes, but you have to then monitor the people who are doing that now. Like for instance, with the Dorje rod, the thing is that, and that's what that symbol is. Okay. So the Dorje is actually in between your two fingers, just like you see on, they try to give you a hint of it on Doctor Strange, where they're wearing those rings that hold two fingers. Okay. And this is because in these two fingers right here, that's where your pulse or your current comes from when you're doing your breathing, right? So even if you're, whatever you're doing to build up the frequency, you feel the pulse come from here. So the thing is that you would want to then send that pulse back into the body so that it can then come back out and send it back. And then pretty soon your fuel would jump off like a car. I mean, every single thing that you see in the car is actually the construct many times of the body. You just can't, you got to meld them together. You can't separate them. So anyway, when you get that pulse going on and then it keeps sending that energy back to you, that's why they're holding that device. But they're holding the Dorje and they're also holding the bell. Because the problem is that when you get a little bit too far out on the spiritual plane, if you don't have something to bring you back, then you can become dismembered. And again, so that's a depth stuff. And that knowledge and those abilities are available to you, but it also means that, those kind of things you need to dedicate some time and you need to dedicate some energy into. It's definitely more than possible, but it ain't like, okay, I'm going to go and basically master teleportation and then still hit the Lakers game later on, or,
Yeah.
deal with, just the world as it truly is. So, there's a lot of encouragement. I think, it's just we need to read a bit more, because there's a lot of older books to where this is all the subject is. And and to tell you the truth, man, there's still people that'll tell you that that's a trap too. And it's like a trapophobia. They'll tell you, going after all those powers. In fact, that's actually in a lot of the books that, like Falun Gong, and those going after all those powers is only going to solidify your presence more in the matrix. And that's what you don't want. You really want to go into nihilism. And the truth
Mhm.
is, at the end of the day, you can never let anyone tell you what you are about and what you want to achieve, and also how you're going to achieve it, because you won't find that you're still in this ancient monk age where you got all Tibetan the Tibetan medicine there and the Ayurveda, and they're opening up, they're bleeding you out with getting your nadis clear, and getting your lymphatic system clear. And that's why I still study to where's all this now, like bioresonance pads or the fractal pads get to stimulate the lymphatic system. You'll find that it's very easy to go into a lucid dream if you're laying on one of those, right? So I basically got to find where these lost relics are, because I would want to be able to get out and to get back in. Likewise, how the mind works. You'll notice how basically in virtual reality, and of course people say, hey, if you even put a virtual reality goggle on, then you're deeper into the matrix. This is always going to be the thing. But notice how in virtual reality, if you've ever experienced it, the mind doesn't actually even know the difference between virtual reality and the real world in many instances. So where does that end and where does that begin? And is the mind able to be trained to treat the real world as if it's virtual reality? And so when we go further on that, what we found is that when you're opening up something, you spin it a certain way. Okay. And this can actually be done visually, that there's a way that you can literally get to a point to where your mind is so strong that it could spin the door that's in front of you. And the only way you get a hint of this, again, is if maybe a little LSD, maybe a little DMT, you can see that something's going on. There's a possibility of doing that. But what does that do? Because for me, I need to know what is the purpose. And what the purpose is that if you can spin something, then you alter and you rearrange its molecular or cymatic pattern. And then once you do that, you literally open it up. You open up a gate or a womb. Now that it's open, what are you traveling through? So this is why they have these supreme attainments and achievements of controlling the mind, because now you need to be able to visualize the geometry that corresponds to the phenomena that you're actually looking to cause. So that's a person who's basically, and again, we're still in the matrix in doing that. So I have a hard time now, and I've been through a lot, brother. Like my life is not necessarily the glamour story at all. And, but everything that I've got, I've really had to put in a lot of time and energy for it. So I'm basically, again, I'm just saying I'm not one of those people that just been fortunate to find all this out. The main thing is I never gave up, because I knew if I was giving up, then I was giving up on myself. And now I'm at the phase. I've been listening to a guy, his name is, I think it's called Illuminati Matrix. And he's extremely in one direction about this same kind of concept about, even tapping into the reality anymore and paying attention to what's going on is only getting you further and deeper into the mind control and the programming and the traps that have already been set up for it. And I get that. My goal is actually to get people out of that. But one thing that I really was able to latch onto, because that's what I do with everybody, I just take the cream of whatever they're presenting and I drop the rest. And the same thing you had to do with my conversation. What I got out of what he was presenting the most, though, was the all-knowing state, because he kept talking about it. And as I kept listening to him, I realized that, see, what I had done is I went 6 years long into whatever they call the rabbit hole. Like I bought excavators for the rabbit hole. Like it wasn't just a hole anymore when I was done with it. We moved it and we built buildings on top of it. But the thing is that I still was seeing personally that this wasn't actually going to get me to where I wanted to go now. It fulfilled all that time in the past, but I'm not going to ever stay in one place. So what happened is I needed to know that there was a place that I already knew everything. That this whole tangent of trying to find everything out and find out how to do it was causing its own problems. It doesn't mean that you stop doing it. It just means that you do it in a different way. And the new way that you're doing it, it renders the results that you're looking for. And, and that, this stuff is very difficult to dance around in language, but hopefully, I got close enough to explain to you exactly, what these fields exist with. And, I know exactly where you're at and what you're talking about. And then because a lot of what we're saying is in English, I only can say one thing or the other thing. Exactly. Because I have to go binary on you every time. So, okay, this is where I stand. But honestly, man, I'm telling you, man, I believe my maxim is all is self. That where every single thing here is a part of me. And how long it's going to take me to get out of here is when I realize that. So every single thing that I'm uncomfortable with, don't like, and this is what I built up a huge wall for myself for 4 years. Those are going to be the things that I need to actually study to determine what was in that triggered me so much to feeling so diametric about it. And then I started realizing the joke was on me, that I was actually in a dualistic plane, in that I was maybe one of the warriors. I was like, you're a warrior in the army of God, and and you're battling evil, and they get you to buy into the whole thing, just like you're saying. And then you realize that you're basically becoming scarred up in the whole thing, and you're not getting what you're looking for as your result. So then you start trying to find harmony and what the definition of harmony is. And I did a show called Rainbowism. And it was basically explaining on the Mount of Harmon, which is where we got harmony from, was where when these 7 colors, which you see come into the prism, which created the matrix, and the 8th color, which is clear, all got together, what was created was us. And we can either choose to keep the bridge mended together, or we can tear it down. And that's what's going on in the matrix. And clearly right now, a lot of things is separate. But also, while the matrix was running, there was another world. An inner world, an inner verse. And I could put that one together and at least live in my own being, my own shell, in my own self, balanced and harmonic, and then start radiating out from there. And that's why I believe I'm in Central America. Because then I could just, once fixing myself, then everything that I would do would reflect who I am. And that's what I know. Like everything that I do reflects who I am. So if I come in unbalanced, if I come in crazy, if I come in with a different state of mind, that's going to be what I manifest and create. And so I started just working with my mind more and my conscious and my spirit to say, what do I really need to understand all this? Because my time is running out, man. Like I know everyone here they don't believe ever when they're going to go. It's a common phenomenon. You've seen millions of people do it. And yet, it's like I prepare for my exit every single day. And now I'm comfortable with my exit because I know how to let go. That was the final stage for me. I'm going to be all right. I already know that nothing, because even where you're at right now, this is what you got to think about. It's all really about integrity at this point. Whatever has got you at this stage, which is actually you, will not finish this. It's all like there's too much work that's gone in. And you realize that more and more, the more you start pulling away. The more you actually start saying, you know what, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Because that's what I had to do just recently. It's like, whatever's going to happen with all this stuff is just going to happen. And then all of a sudden I feel more and more the current, more and more the breakthrough, more and more the connection. So, that's just the advice that I can give.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, like, have you seen or have you done these powers in person without any substances? And you mentioned that your time's running out. Like, you feel like you're about to be leaving this realm currently?
Oh, everyone's going to leave this realm. Time's always running out. It's just about whether people are aware of that. I'm aware of that at all times. My main space, because everyone has different gifts, right? Because that's what they are. Cities are gifts. They're your gems. They're your jewels. They actually correspond to your chakras. When the chakra is balanced, then you're capable of using the power that's associated with that chakra. I generally hang out right above the navel. That keeps me at the balance point. I've been way up here in the crown. And that's all of what you can think of there from seeing the future. I used to actually dream the next day and then go and live the next day. This whole thing with spiritual knowledge, I can tell you every single place that I've ever gotten some kind of knowledge from But when it comes to like knowledge about the world, I may not even remember your name tomorrow. So these kind of abilities are actually, these are the talents that have been invested in you, and they reside within everyone. So there are things that I've been able to achieve that you would say is paranormal or superhuman, but I couldn't run down the entire list and say I can do all of those. So I think, well, I know because I don't do a lot of thinking anymore, that each one of us, it's like a ship in itself, that everyone is at their own station and actually has different abilities. And when we unite, we're not only able to, it's not so much as teach like, hey, let me show you how to do something. Just in sheer proximity, you give a person your ability. You've given people the ability to dream. And that was even before I started becoming, very spiritual person. But I've naturally had this whole thing going on in the dream realm, and I've met people, maybe relationships or whatever, that the person didn't dream. Then all of a sudden, in interacting with me, they were able to start dreaming, and now they can't stop the dream. And sometimes they even fought me that they don't want to dream anymore. But the thing is that what I'm saying is all those different abilities, and you can read about them as the cities. Some of those things that I've actually been able to achieve. It is not personally my pursuit to try to like check each and one of those off. What I'm working on now is just regeneration, because that's actually the key to all this stuff. When you can drive energy back into your body. So if you notice, naturally. So if you notice that, or whatever, like I don't know the difference between natural and artificial anymore. I don't play those games. This is the thing, is I don't let the matrix divide me, because that's what you'll start dealing with after a while. Something tell you this is wrong, this is right, and then you'll miss the knowledge. The thing is that, let's say, for instance, driving energy back into the body, that's the core of it, because once you can regenerate your cells, then you can figure out what to do with the equipment that was given to you from the time that you were born. That some of the things, like even being behind the wrong truck and it's pushing out a bunch of smog and you're out the window, or you got the window down breathing it, has pretty much made that faculty defunct. So there's a physical aspect to this that's real. If you calcify certain glands in the body, then they won't function. So what happens is that you get on this path then to search within yourself to where these blockages are. And true, again, a person can sit down and say, I'm not messing with any of that, and they'll be in that same position 10 years from now. It's just about going in and realizing that each of these abilities of whatever you're looking for corresponds to a certain part of the body. And when you know the geometry between that side of the body, that gives you the color, that gives you the shape, and that gives you the sound, that gives you the shape, that gives you the color. That's the universal language. So when you're applying that sound, shape, and color every day to your life, then you take on, or you embody, that power. And as difficult as it may sound, it's actually as simple as that. As many items that you can get that resonate whatever you're attempting to achieve, if you put those in your environment, you will be able to achieve that. You just need to know what those elements are. So there's a tree, there's a gem, there's a color, there's a smell. This is actually what you see generally in magical books. They give you a correspondence to everything. That all means something, because if you saw the matrix as a mainframe, each of those things have the same code residing in them. So when you bring all those redundant codes into the same space, the space then actually gives birth to whatever that code is through you. And so this is how, you have, the ability to do all this if you choose.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. First, I gotta say, though, I disagree with that everyone has to die. I believe death is a choice. And for me, my will is to end the corrupt cycle. But I want to definitely move on to your view on flat Earth. I heard you speak on it before, and I like what you say a lot of times with your information you present. It's usually really well, but I feel like you always go the safe route. So, like, how do you feel about?
Because you got terrorists running around right now, that you got flat earth terrorists that will blow all your shit up. But excuse me, my language. But the thing is that, well, now first of all, remember, like, I do want to chime into what you said in the end, because my actual my Skype message for a while was that basically that I would be the end of death. And that's really how I feel, and because it's just how I understand death. Death is basically the cut where there's a cutoff and there's no memory of what went on before. So to me, that is a choice, because you can, if you reach truth, because truth is the only thing that will stand the cosmic storm that we go through when we leave these bodies. So if you're with truth, then you transcend into the next stage with full awareness of what went on before and who you are now. So to me, that is to defeat death. And I would wish that on anyone in the world that they could achieve that. And as far as flat earth, I feel like that flat earth is the gift and the curse for many people. And it's because it's a lot of baby going out with the handbasket that I feel like is a big part of the agenda to keep people ignorant. Because once the flat earth concept really starts, what generally sets in after that is that basically the stars and the planets and all that stuff is not real. That for all we know, that they're basically lights bought from Kmart that they just stick in the sky. And what happens with that is that there's simple principles here. If you magnify lights, not the sun, but there's other stars, like some of the ancient craft was to take something like a reversed telescope and take in the light from a star, not just the sun, and to magnify that light onto something, an object, a piece of paper. And what was then witnessed, which I've experienced, is that whatever was infused with that light would then take on the properties of that, where that light came from, right? And this is what you actually realize is the core of the magical systems that really worked. So again, in the flat earth arena, those are light bulbs. So none of that, what I just said, is even possible. The second thing which I was saying about orientation, if we want to know what's actually going on, then we should probably take a look at the ancestors. And what the ancestors did is the reason why they look at the stars is because they believe that the stars were their ancestors. They believe the same concept that each person has a star in the sky, that when you're born, your star appears. And the importance of that is that when you understand where your star appears, you actually know the whole procession. You know what it's actually going to go through next. And that's what we call zodiac and life paths. And many people have found that information to be very accurate, enough to actually notice that there's some deep accuracy going on, especially if you get the proper charts, etc. So what I believe, where we're at is that there's designs of these geometric fields that are based on the limitation or the wavelengths of what we can perceive in our reality that creates a certain shape. And that's the shape of our earth. I don't believe that it's flat except for to a two-dimensional mind. And when we choose to get into another space, what I've witnessed is we take on another geometry. And then that geometry, like a keyhole into another room, allows us to go into the pores or the membranes of that field. So it's like square peg, square hole, round peg, round hole. If you try to put a square peg in a round hole, it's not going to go through. So that's my whole take on it. It's like it's a morphogenic field. So to me, it's not just a flat disc that everyone is coasting on that you're going to fall off on the other side. It's much more than that. And that's why I haven't completely subscribed to the flat earth idea. Now, there are things that I do believe are true about what is mentioned in the flat earth, such as, the buffoonery of what NASA, who clearly are Nazis, have been up to with their advent into what we're calling space and their use of those fields, and of course what they're telling us that they're used for. So that's really my take, is that I believe that the earth is actually more like a crater. Like if you drained all the water off, that you would just have a big massive crystalline structure. And the truth though is, when you study physics, that those are called standing waves. So you would basically get something solid the moment that you get two frequencies that are the same and then they collide, right? Or excuse me, two frequencies that are the same. They collide and they create a standing wave. And that standing wave is what we call physicality. So all these rocks, all these crystals, all this is the accumulation, like in the Kabbalah, which I would rather go with because it's thousands of years old. It's called the klipoth. Basically the excrement, the byproduct of who we really are is what goes on earth. You see what I mean? And that's the easiest way to put it, because we're such great beings that even our byproduct, like even us on a bad day, is all the glory and the splendor that you witness in front of you. But it, again, is still only a fraction of who we truly are. So to me, if it's shaped like a crater and it has crystals all in it, if someone just wants to make it flat, I don't even see where the argument would continue. I was able to find on a metaphysical level the flat earth concept to be very useful because there's other ways to look at this besides just physical. And the reason is that I did see earth when I went through the whole flat earth phase myself as a disc in many tenses, because like a DVD, like the DVD, which is actually a cognate of David, or the disc. And this disc containing all the information, right? And that in the center of the disc was a spindle, and the disc was spinning around the spindle. And I use that as my own personal diagram, because if Earth is flat, then we should be flat. That's what a morphogenic field, that's what holographic nature really is.
But not flat like a piece of paper, though.
But not flat like a piece of paper, though. Exactly. Which is my argument. But if you're seeing it in 2 dimensions, it is flat like a piece of paper. So I was just thinking they needed to metamorphosize it into a 3-dimensional structure. And then what they would actually get is the true shape of what it is, because you can see an orb-like energetic field moving around disk magnets. But what if that shape was also habitable? Like that orb may not be habitable to someone who's not on that frequency, but to someone who's on that soluble frequency, it's habitable to them. So in conclusion, what I came up with was that you could use this as a template for the body. It's very similar to the Merkaba. And then once you kind of rose your disc up, then the process would be, and this is how I would always take these kind of concepts, because they have some truth in them if thousands of people believe in them. Where most people would be is actually out in the outer edge of the disc. And they would keep repeating the same cycle like a record. And what they would need to do is they would need to move closer into the disc until they eventually got to the spindle. And then once they're at the spindle, they would reach literally what we would say is our spine, which would be like an elevator going up and down. So then what I did is I came from the outer edges of the spindle. And as I was walking through the areas of the disc, I was constantly encountering people that were profusely saying that was the only part of the disc. Listen to what I'm saying. You'll always encounter people that will always insist that the part that they have figured out or they know is the only part and is the only way. And as you keep walking down the disc headed towards the spindle, you're starting to get closer and closer to the middle. So basically things start speeding up. You start basically dealing with less BS. Now your energetic field is picking up. And then when you get to the center, you can now take the elevator. What I did was I went to the center of this whole concept, because flat earth is a paradigm shifting concept. So anytime a person adapts it, they're going to shift their paradigm. And to me, that's always useful, because it gets them out of whatever they were doing before and whatever they were believing before and thought was so real, because Earth has so many of those. And then it puts them into like shaking up that, getting used to doing that kind of thing. You're going to need to get used to it, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that's not the way that we think that it is. And then so I used it constructively. I got on the disc, I raised it up, and I sent edicts. So basically I pulled myself out of the orb-shaped, circular-like, redundant cycle kind of Earth for a while. And I got on my disc, my saucer, my DVD, and I alienated myself from everything. So this is kind of how I can take all this stuff and use it constructively. It's all riddles. It rolls all into itself. And then once I did that I went on from there. But as far as like me just staying in the flat earth thing, because that's what I was saying about everything. Then now you got this flat earth club. Now they want to induct you. Now they want to get you. I was at LIB. I did Saturday via satellite. I'm on the panel with David Wolf, and and he's going on about flat Earth, right? And he went in like he had all this stuff right. So then I came up next, and I gave more of a blown out version of it, right? But then I was told to remove those things from my YouTube and everything, because David Wolf didn't want his whole flat earth concept to actually go public because of just, what that may do to his own career. And so I'm like,
Mm.
I told him if he can't take the heat, maybe he should stay in the kitchen. But I was just saying, like, there's rules to this. Anytime you come in talking about this kind of stuff, like, you're going to get people like, you get a lot of people that support you, but there's also, remember, you're going against mainstream with any of this. And I think at the end of the day, brother, that's the whole thing, is that's what empowers us the most, is simply having the extra wherewithal to not accept this stuff as it's laid out, and then to start growing our own concepts. And the truth, I mean, I'm just telling you where the end of it in the beginning is actually in the all-knowing phase. And being able to get there is actually what we're working on, trying to talk down every single thing that we've created to allow us to just break down the wall completely between, us and the free flowing, so you can get into your character. Because then what happens is that, like, this wall between your spiritual world versus the matrix kind of breaks down. Not that one invades the other, but you basically control the matrix at that point. You're basically, we call it an uploader. This person that's not getting downloaded to and reacting all the time. They're just sending stuff out in the matrix, and it's always responding the way that they want it to.
Yeah, I heard that panel discussion that you were on. But for me, like, when I look at the flat earth, I think of it more like a pie. So like an apple pie, maybe perhaps in a container. Now, do you think this world has a firmament? And if it does have a firmament, how do we break it? And then what's on the other side?
That honestly, I think that it does, because what I had to do is I had to take this stuff back down to like a smaller level, like an atomic level. And then also kind of get it to correspond to ancient knowledge. And, I believe that it has like a bubble around it, just like our bodies. That's kind of what the skin is. And then there's this point of the skin that there's only actually two elements that can go deep into the skin, and that's magnesium sulfate, and I think is DPSO, which is a inorganic substance. But basically, that you can't get through a certain part of the skin. But then in the event, like, you get shot, and someone opens up that wound, like, what it is to have an open wound. You can catch an infection so easy. You're losing air, you're losing blood pressure. So I believe personally that the world has something that is very similar to that around it. And then now here's the key, because to puncture it, you only take on a certain geometric shape. And that's what the whole key to the third eye is. Now you're bringing it all out, but so the third eye, when you read deep into the knowledge, what they say is the biggest gift that man was ever given, man and woman, our species, whatever. What is the third eye? Because the third eye can pierce beyond the envelope, like it can pierce through the envelope without being detected. And what that basically means is it doesn't cause karma. So you can actually use the third eye to pierce and to go into different realms and be almost unintelligible in those realms. That's what this whole concept of an all-seeing eye that can see everything, that's the third eye. So in that note, the third eye is capable of piercing the envelope of this realm and getting right beyond it. And that's actually what happens when people open their third eye. And then what they're able to see, first, a concave triangle field, it's like a HUD, goes over the vision, like triangles with round edges on them, and a myriad of them like a peacock. And when that happens, all of a sudden, you're able to see what I would determine as the spaces within the spaces, basically the other things that are actually overlapping this reality that we don't interact with every single day. So there it is. So the third eye, to me, I wouldn't say the only thing, but is the main equipment that we've been given, if you want to give it that term, to allow us to be able to pierce beyond the veil of earth and to see into the other worlds, whether that's the realm of the living, what people will refer to as the realm of the dead, etc. That's how that's achieved.
But how do you think we could physically pierce that veil? Like, is it I know it's like the elite.
Well, I mean, I would suppose that what you would do is you would take the measurements from the concave of the eye, and you would make some type of craft have that at the same point. Well, let's talk about what NASA did. What NASA did, and again, you're pissing flat earthers off right now, but they coated the tip of the space shuttle with melanin, because they discovered that melanin actually contains the property to pierce through the cosmic fields, the gamma fields, etc. And so they, put it on the front of the craft, and that's what gives them the ability to pierce through without the actual ship erupting into flames. So that's what they use, and that's to take a physical craft. Now, again, seeing a physical craft out there is literally like watching a primitive barbarian try to get off the ground, because that is not how you would want to really fly out there. You would want to use a moral, aerodynamic type of being, because it's not just about flying out there. Think about even the concept of what they're doing. It's not just about flying out there. It's about tapping into what's out there. So just if you're in this hard ass spacecraft, you ain't going to communicate with nothing with all that equipment on the dashboard. You're going to be better off using your hypersentience to feel other waveforms in an attempt to communicate by learning the light patterns within the languages. So, it's again the smoke and the mirrors, because I don't believe for 1 minute, especially some of the things that I've read and some of the books that I've come across, I don't think for 1 minute that there aren't people on the planet already that understand how to navigate in and out of the realm into the center of whatever is inside the core of the planet, and et cetera, spaces within spaces. And I've been privy to myself, making those journeys. But again, because it's not all like a storybook, you have to learn how to do it. You need to know how to, you need to learn how to do certain things. And that's part of the process.
But where does that average Joe go to get the information, how to just shatter the veil, or how to go to the center?
Keywords, start with Robert Temple's The Serious Mystery, and to let it take you from there. Because what happens is that obviously, we can guide ourselves on the journey. We're more than capable of doing that, especially if we have a couple pointers. But what keywords are is basically when you're reading something and certain words come across that strike interest to you, but you don't actually know what they mean. It behooves you to actually write that down and then run that across Google and start finding more people talking about that. Then it's like following the breadcrumbs. And it doesn't take long, especially with Google, before you're right at what you're looking for. So, again, that's something that I would tell like a neophyte and initiate when they're, going through the path and trying to get more information about it. Because let's just face it, you're not going to meet somebody and tell them, hey, stop thinking. And then that's going to be like the last thing you ever say to them. It doesn't happen. I know people get mad at me because it's not like that. And, it wasn't like that for me. I'm not going to be able to talk people down that fast off of this thing. I try to do it in the most concise ways possible, but we got Looney Tunes still in our brains. We got the Jingle to Power Rangers still going on back there. So there's a lot. You got to be the Snowpiercer. You have to power through all that kind of stuff. So what I did was I trained my mind to begin to ingest this ancient knowledge and to make sense of it. And just like anything else, like if you want to study CAD, if you want to study physics or whatever, it's going to look almost impossible in the beginning, and it's just going to be daunting. And many people give up at that point. But if you stick with it and you kind of get out what you're looking for with this, like you said, I'm looking for, how to accomplish these kind of abilities, and remembering the basics, like what Napoleon Hill says, if you're trying to achieve something like that, then you're going to have to sacrifice. You're going to have to put something in. And this is the same way as you want to be a bagger at McDonald's or Ralph's or Publix. It ain't going to be that hard. But if you want to be, for lack of better terms, the president of the United States, imagine all the stuff you're going to have to go through. And it's the same kind of thing when you want to go and achieve something, something spiritual that's paramount. Then, you got to find the equation to how to get into it to benefit from that. You see what I mean? And you learn so much along the way. You benefit from along the way.
I mean, like, I've been on the path of madness for years now, for quite some time. And I feel like the only way to truly know is to physically go travel to the center of this world and find out if there's a magnetic mountain, or pierce that veil and see, is there waters above the firmament for real? Could we cause a secondary flood?
That spells out right there that you're going to have to jump back into the matrix, because you're going to need some cash. Like, don't confuse the two. That somehow you're going to get some spiritual power, and all of a sudden cash is going to pop up. That's the beauty of understanding the two different worlds. And I listen to a lot of the older guys and people who've already succeeded and made it in the matrix just from that perspective. And so I'm back listening to stuff like, again, Napoleon Hill, because it's like listening to your granddad, and he's just telling you how the matrix really works. And those kind of things, if you forget about that, then it kind of short circuits, 20,000 leagues, 80,000 leagues under the sea in a bathyscap. If you don't got bathyscap budget, it kind of melts down from there. Like me personally, I love to use my body as the vehicle, and I use my consciousness, and I glide and I travel, and I can get into these different states. But now I found, brother, that the most powerful thing that I can do is to bring what my visions are, because, you have a very creative mind, and start to actually begin to fabricate and create things. So, like a guy took nothing but beetle shells and coated the bottom of something with those beetle shells and was able to sit on that thing and accomplish some level of levitation and teleportation just because of the geometry within the beetle shells. Now, does that mean that I'm going to go and find me, I don't know how many beetles it's going to take to coat the bottom of the thing? No, because that's not my passion to figure out how to teleport. But if I was you, I'll be trying to figure out what is the geometry within the beetle shell. So that's kind of like the thing. When you move with this laser, not with an elephant gun, and you go right to what you want because you just want mechanics. I want to do this. How do I do it? That's when you get the results, because that's how the computer is. Like if you just type it in X, Y, Z, Y, T, U, V, X, enter, and expecting to get something back, you're not going to get anything but an error. But if you put the code in properly and you say, this is exactly what I want, and you start solidifying your intentions and stay focused on one thing, two at best, then you can we will achieve that. I mean, I'm example of that. Like, so many people tell me they get killed for this kind of stuff, and just you'll never make it, and how are you going to develop a site, and just so many different things. And I'm here. I have good availability to troubleshoot. I'm a likable person, so this is where it's taken me.
I hear what you're saying, but like if we could fly, money is irrelevant. You wouldn't need to chart an expedition crew if you could just get up like Superman and fly down to the Antarctica.
Well, trust me, the moment you jump in like Superman and try to fly off to Antarctica, the moment you're going to see how they short circuit Superman really fast, it just sounds like you're doing some things that are not allowed in the Matrix. You can fly in that astral body, but you jump in that real body and think you're going to go into the Dodgers game and upset the world. I can guarantee you that'll be the time that a lot of other people start flying too, if that's the case. Like if you're going to be the first person to fly. Like remember, I've thought about all these things, but there's certain restrictions and limitations to the governors within the reality, and that's based on geometry. When you're looking to do something, there's always a space that you can accomplish something in, but you can't get frustrated because it's not here. And this is the big thing, is that apples to pears. Like we need to know why certain things like that are not possible. Do you know that the reason why Earth is so slow and so dense is because things are growing on it? If things were moving at the same pace that you would like to go, or you would like to move according to the vibratory frequencies of the things that you're looking to achieve, we would have no children. We would have no small plants, because the vibration would be so high that whole child phase that everything needs to go through, that it can stand on its own, it wouldn't be possible. So that's. But
do we need them though?
Do you, or does everything else?
I'm just saying, like
now.
I don't want to just be like some type of god in the astral or the dream world. I want to be able to do that type of stuff in the physical.
Well, first you need to work on Earth. You need to work on Earth first. You have big aspirations.
I personally think if you're going to generate that much energy, you're not going to be in the same physical reality anymore. Like I don't think
that's why they actually call it degrees. And remember, it's a real thing, that what you're looking to achieve puts off an actual vibratory signature. At a certain point, even that vibratory signature messes with other magnetic devices. So this means computers, all these kind of things which we've witnessed get blown out. Data on cards, it's not there anymore. And this is it's not a spiritual thing. It's just because you're building up the electromagnetic field within your body, and now it's measurable. And when you get to a certain rate and frequency, it's kind of not like the X-Men and all that kind of stuff and how they depict it. It's like, it's so real. You lose kind of all childish concepts of what the energy was really capable of doing. And then you move right into just like a grandfather kind of like bigger things in the matrix, kind of like looking at the gods of the movie. I think they had the gods of Egypt where they went up there to Ra and they saw Ra battling the big worm that was going to swallow the earth. And,
Yeah.
everyone's trying to wonder why God is not down here playing around with the petty stuff. And it's like, there's bigger stuff to deal with. And it's as simple as that. You have bigger projections and things to do to once you get to that kind of energetic potential, you're thinking about something totally different to accomplish. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Does that suffice? We got to move on to another question. So last question, Muscle Dragon.
okay, all right. Okay, so real quick then, what's your take on the Mandela effect? And do you think, like, how does one actually become that sorcerer supreme? How do you become God? How do you surpass Yahweh? How do you beat all of them? Where's Tiamat? Like, try to wrap that all up into one little piece.
Okay. What was the first question?
The Mandela effect. Do you have any comments on the Mandela effect?
So basically what I believe personally the Mandela effect is, because I think that there's a lot of validity to it. And it's just that nothing in this reality is really fixed. And when you start playing around with time, because, that's possible, you just cymatic manipulation, you move in and out of the spectrum, you can cause anomalies that create things that are different than what they were before. So I don't think there's a non-technical way of explaining something like the Mandela effect, beside that there's already some reality manipulations going on, which we've been, looking into, especially with a lot of the work on neurological, like what can affect you neurologically, what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, what you think. And, the range of that is immense. So I think that the Mandela effect personally is something that is caused by the phenomenon of moving around time. And I know that power is in the hands of the military industrial complex and other factions like third parties such as the Jasons that, basically traffic that kind of technology. How to become the whatever you want to call it, the supreme, truthfully, is getting the mind, body, and soul in balance and understanding that journey, because it is a journey in itself. It's like learning so many different things, like even how to be the divine feminine, divine masculine. What does that really mean? Being able to fess up to what you create. We create things all the time. We don't just create children. We have our ideas and things that manifest in the reality. How are we really seeing those things out? And for me personally, it starts a lot with the diet. Like, as crazy as it may sound, Sorcerer Supreme is not sitting on a Nacho Supreme. It's just, you got to look at whatever comes in is also got to come out. And many people don't think that it's that paramount, but it is. And doing that tri-merge, like what I do is I constantly sharpen up different aspects of myself. And I feel like personally, because at the end of the day, I guess it all has to do with where you're at, with what you feel like you've achieved, or have you reached some level of success. I've been running for 6 years with basically my head down, not looking up, just running as hard as I can. I'm now looking up at this point and I'm seeing that I've changed thousands of people's lives. To me, that is supreme than any dogmatic God, because I didn't make myself the central character in the theme. I didn't say, hey, your master, your guru, whatever, James, here he is. And so to me, that's why I kind of got the t-shirt on Earth, because if I want to go and move some worlds around or spin the wall or whatever, I can go choose to do that even right now. But the interesting part is you'll find that that's not really addictive. Consciousness is not really addictive. What's addictive is the connection that we have with each other. Because at the end of the day, that's all there really is that's important. And I think it's going to take a long time for many people to realize that. But there's just so much in what each one of us has deep in us. That's why I kind of roll this path. I like the path more of the motivational speaker, or the person who can basically get other people to bud, right? Because think about it, like every single person that's around you is like a seed. And if you can coerce them to come out of that shell and begin to bud, there's actually no greater thing to me. I mean, coasting around and flying around, like, man, I can do all that in my dream world. Remember, you spend half of your time mostly in the dream. So when you really get control of that space, and that has a lot to do with getting your physical body clean, no matter what people say to you, getting the physical body clean allows you to have more control over that dream world. cutting out the cheese, cutting out the bread, and getting rid of a lot of the acids, like so much tomato sauce and those kind of things, and switching over not just in an alkaline, but to where your body is soluble. You don't got a lot of oily, bacteria-ridden fluids running through the body. Then you're right at the envelope, and what you experience from there. Like, think about it. The main thing that you're looking to do in most cases is to create something that is going to benefit all of us. And whether you know that or not right now, at first it's kind of like escape. Hey, last one to leave Earth is a rotten egg. And then you start realizing that it's all inside. Like, when I close my eyes, I'm going to go inside. When I die, or whatever they call it, I'm going to go inside. And as long as I'm comfortable with what's in there, then I can live there. I can contain myself there until I find, I don't know, maybe another matrix. Maybe I never go into matrices again. It's just, again, right now, physically, I got to hold on to that. And I'll tell you, this is the last thing that I'll say. Spirituality and thoughts and virtual reality, or virtual connections like internet, none of that is solid. So what happens is that when you're only adapting that kind of stuff, the physical reality or the impact that you have in the real world, it becomes minuscule. There's nothing solid. And the issue with that is that it gets a little shaky, especially as you get older, you get more experienced. So remember that the physical reality still does serve a purpose. You're standing on it, you walk on it every single day. And the most knowledge that we can get is from what we're experiencing, because even while we were talking, there were certain things you're saying, well, but how do you know? But we actually live many of those things every day in the reality, and that's the proof. So it's like, to get our mind more sound, we should look into this physical reality and what we can really accomplish here, because it's not about your appearance, how you look. Some of the, let's say, ugliest people are the most popular and famous. And it's because they defy what people say they can do in the reality. So every single thing that we can name that's supposed to be what's holding us back is actually what other people have used to propel themselves forward. And if you see in this reality that you're experiencing any problems, maybe it's your job, your duty, your goal, your path to fix that problem. Because there was never anybody that was ultra successful in the Matrix that didn't do just that. They found the problem that they were having, and they found a solution for that problem. So if you have a mind that wants to tap into, these different spaces, imagine how many young minds want to do that same thing. And even with you developing certain things, it could be of a book, a simple book for children. It could be a video game. It could be anything. It could give them a glimpse into the realization of that. And you'll find that how we really move and what we're really made out of is more capable of living in something like that and being a part of something like that on a spiritual level than anything else. It's like we've set such high bars. Again, a little bit too much X-Men and all this stuff. You throw lightning from the hand and burn out the Sith Lord. We've been tapping into that so much that we've actually forgot where our true use really is. And that's bringing those creative, imaginative devices and things into the physical reality. And that's what I'm doing. Like, that's why I find that, in conversations and stuff like that, this is great. This is fine and dandy, but I never get tired when I'm in there inventing or writing down or drafting or creating something. So that's what I know is my true calling, my true passion. And I found that, and this is what's coming next. I have this device that energizes water, that I'll probably be able to do more with that water device than I've maybe done in 1,000 recordings. And it's because this is words. And that's why my new Skype comment is, let my actions replace my words. Because I've gotten some thumbs up on my words. My words are great. Now I need to create what these words equal, what they really mean to me. Because even if, you may have heard me a couple times, you have questions for me, some things you believe, some things you don't believe. Yeah, that's all That's how we take it. But if I give you some of this water, then I don't need you to believe in anything. I just need you to feel yourself. So notice how then maybe my best form of communication, my best language is something that I can create and then give to you versus something that I can say to you. And then we have to also think about that as ourselves. Like your gift is deeper than the language that we speak. It's the essence of what you have that you can give to others. But remember, you got to think about it that way. You can't actually, it doesn't work like that. There's something about the mechanics and the mathematics of this matrix that if you just think about yourself and like what you want out of this, you can never get it. And it's just because the energetic potential and all the people that you're going to need to get you to where you're going to need to go, you're not going to be able to tap into them. So that's the big thing here. Like we don't want to write off like the sheeple and all those kind of things. Like we are to assist in taking people to another level, but not to, push them down because they won't go there. And so those are just pointers. And, like I only can be real. There's a lot about this that's spiritual and it's fanciful, but there's a lot of this stuff that you're going to have to get into your everyday life and really look at and wonder, is that really the thing that's keeping me and blocking me from what I really want to reach?
I see. Thanks. I appreciate you taking the time answering all those questions I had. And I think it's funny that you mentioned video games and books because I'm actually at the early stage of creating one, and I was about to dive into that full force, but I've kind of been holding off. And I do agree with you regarding food. And I personally am a vegan. I think like the raw style is better. And even today, I didn't even eat anything. I only drank some water so I could come in here with a clear head. But thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And that's it. It's bringing that power, bringing that ability into the matrix and creating your things. Like, bring your wonders to the world, brother. Like, that's what it is. Like, to me, like, out of everything that they mentioned in the New Age movements and all this kind of stuff, I'm just like, man, just bring your wonders to the world. Like, I don't want to hear what you have to say anymore. It's wide open right now. Like, you can really get to where you need to go from your living room. If you're just persistent. Like, there's so much stuff that's open source, and just taking advantage of it is the key.
Yeah. So, final question from Thomas is, do you have any breathing exercises, perhaps, to expand consciousness?
For sure. What I did was I did if you type in whole body breathing, Sevan Bomar onto YouTube, you'll get a video that I did. It's about an hour and 10 minutes, maybe a little bit shorter. And it not only explains the dynamics of why we're doing this breathing, which is the process of the difference between manifestation versus meditation. Obviously, meditation, you should not really be thinking about anything versus manifestation. Then you need the energy from your meditation to actually manifest something. But understanding the difference between those two processes, how to build energy through the whole body breathing, which I'm showing how to do it standing up. So you can do it in that scenario, sitting down, and then laying down, which those are all three scenarios that you experience in your daily life. So how to keep getting your breathing in during those times. And then what you'll start to feel and experience as you go through those breathing techniques. And to be honest, after the whole experience, much of the world that I'm living in now, I breathed. And because that's the secret. You just breathe to build up the energy. You don't think about anything. And then later on, the energy is used to build the reality that you're walking through. And how grand the reality will become is actually based on how much of the breathing and how consistent you really are with it. So yeah, check out the whole body breathing video. It'll definitely give you some major pointers.
Thank you so much. If anybody has any final thoughts, you can type them in the chat box, and you can find Sevan once again on astralquest.com, and his YouTube is The University. So thank you so much for joining today. My mind has been blown.
You can catch the YouTube at Interstand. You actually, is it Interstand or Interstand? Yeah, it's /Interstand. I think it's /
Okay.
Interstand. I have both of them, but it's just that one of them has all the videos. Yeah, I think it's / let's see. Yeah, Understanding.
Understanding?
Yeah, it's Understanding. So yeah, and there's tons of videos on there, and a person can really get into this more because we kind of glided over a few things, and I think that it was a very comprehensive conversation. Though, like, I believe the question that the brother asked is the questions that we all have, and the perspectives that he expressed were perspectives that we all have. And it's just when we do that together, we get like a 360 degree. So it's not just like my side of it and it's not just his side of it, but it's like the whole side of it. So that way we can play with it and build something on it and, go from here with some growth.
Thank you. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything else you want to?
Well, just to let people know that what I did was just recently is I decided to solve more problems. And I feel like that there's a lot of people out there that really have, great hearts, great ideas, and they're really not being given the opportunity in the matrix right now because, you got to wrangle with the matrix. It's like a wild, wild west. Especially for people who are really more conscious and just trying to stay out of the karma and the crazy stuff that goes on, it could be even more difficult. So we started this faction. It's called Spirit Techs. And what it's really about is actually getting people employed so they can actually be making some money and doing that in a karma-free way. We call it karma-free wealth. Some people ask me, do I believe in karma and dharma? I've seen some of it right firsthand. So yes, I do. And I believe that, when you're working at times in a field that is a little bit counterproductive to what you actually represent, this kind of keeps you on a treadmill. So you want to get into something that's actually helping and empowering people. And so what I'm going to do is I'm not just going to create these amazing devices because I've got myself on the level to where I have fabrication abilities, but I'm also going to give people the opportunity to represent those products and give them amazing commissions for doing that. I'm going to basically cut out the middleman because we're the manufacturers, and I'm going to pass that capital that would be going to that middleman to the people who decide to actually represent the product. So if a person's looking in the next year, especially to really get into something that's going to move and be very successful and still has a very solid conscious foundation to it, they should definitely check out Spirit Techs because that's where it's at. And to me, that's going to be my next contribution. I got 6 years of basically hardcore spiritual knowledge under my belt. And I just think right now, the most important things is for people to actually figure out what they're going to do in the matrix and in the physical world so that they can get to this level of sovereignty and sustainability that they're truly looking for.
And where can we find that? Is there a website where that will be?
That's at spirittechs.com. That's SPI. I'll put it in the message here. That's http://spiritechs.com. As it's spelled. So that's spirittechs.com. And then, it gives you more information about what it is. There's an application. And then even if a person has a website, they're capable of even putting this entire store onto their website. So it actually gives them either more things to talk about in conjunction with their message. And then also, just a way to keep monetizing so that they can feel their vision. Like we're not confused about, obviously, putting money and spirituality together is like putting church and state together, but it's something very necessary. So we've kind of solved that problem by putting it behind something that is actually going to really benefit people and allow them to invest in themselves. So it's reciprocate. It's a good reciprocation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.